Hey everyone, Eric Grenier here of theWrit.ca. I am really happy to have you here joining me for this by-election special with Mississauga, Lakeshore. The polls have just closed just now, and as I'm just getting started, as is always the case when I do one of these streams, let me know in the chat if you can hear me and you can see me all right, because I usually have things set up correctly at the beginning, but it doesn't always happen. So the polls have closed in Mississauga Lakeshore. This is a by-election that we've been waiting for quite a while. Sven Spengeman, who was the Liberal MP since 2015, he resigned earlier this year in June, and the government waited more or less until the end of the year, until the limit for where they could call it, to actually call the by-election. So what you're looking at on the screen right now, there's me here in the bottom corner, and good to see in the chats that you can all see me and hear me. So I'm in the bottom corner, of course. Just above me right up here, this is from the electionatlas.ca. This is just a great resource. It has election results throughout Canadian history, federal, provincial. I might refer to it a couple times during the stream, but right now it's just focused on Mississauga Lakeshore, showing the results from the 2021 election. And then over to my, I'm not sure where it's going to on the screen, but over on one side of me, this is the page from Elections Canada. Let's actually go through that right now. So I'm just going to pull it up on my screen. There's a lot of candidates running in Mississauga Lakeshore. Of course, we have the 5 major parties that have candidates. Charles Sousa is the Liberal candidate. He is, of course, the highest profile candidate. He was a former finance minister for Kathleen Wynne in the Ontario government from 2013 to 2018. He was defeated not only when Kathleen Wynne's government was defeated in 2018, but he was defeated in Mississauga Lakeshore himself as an Ontario Liberal candidate in the 2018 election. Also running is Ron Chinzer of the Conservatives. He is a police officer, so he is running for the Conservative Party. Julia Cole, she is someone who's worked in the Ontario NDP as a parliamentary constituent assistant, so she is running for the New Democrats. Mary Kidnew, who is a community advocate, is running for the Greens. Khaled Al-Sudani, who's an IT professional, is running for the People's Party. And there's a number of other candidates here that I'm going to go through pretty quickly. There's someone from the Rhinoceros Party. Now, if you remember the Rhinoceros Party, it's a party that in the past has largely been a bit of a joke party, and this is the point of it. It's meant to be funny. Sébastien, on Elections Canada, is listed as co-rhino. He's co-rivo. But he is running for the Rhinoceros Party, but he's not running alone. Now, this is the full list of candidates on the Elections Canada website. There's a lot. There's a lot of these. There are 40 candidates in all. This is a record number of candidates running in a by-election, running in any election. Previous record was in the riding of St. Boniface, St. Vital in Manitoba, where they had 21 candidates running in the last election. This is on purpose. This is a campaign that is being led, in this case, by the leader of the Rhinoceros Party, Sébastien Corriveau, to protest against the Liberal government's abandonment of electoral reform. One of the rules changes that was made to the Elections Act and to the laws that was confirmed, I think, in a judicial case, is that you don't necessarily need to live in your riding to run in that riding. You can live somewhere else. So a lot of these people don't live in Mississauga Lakeshore. They're from all over the country. They all share the same official agent, and it's the same official agent as the leader of the Rhinoceros Party. So they were able to, from what I can tell, get 34 people from across the country to put their names on the ballot. And for this reason, the ballot that Elections Canada is offering to people is this massive poster with 2 columns of candidates running on it. There is also a number of other independent candidates. I think there's 1 or 2 that are not part of this campaign because they don't share the same official agent. And there is John the Engineer Turmel, who you might recognize his name. He's run in, I believe, 99 or 100 elections. He runs in provincial elections, federal elections, by-elections, mayoral elections. He's never won. He's not lost once because the election was canceled, but he is the world record holder for running in most elections. So this is a by-election that has some real things at stake, but there's also some fun other stories that we'll be following. I would like to get to the stakes here. Now, I'm seeing you have some comments. You're leaving me in the chat. That's great. So throughout the live stream, what you can do, you can leave some comments there in the live chat. Some questions. I will try to get to them as much as possible. And before we get to really setting the stakes for this by-election, little bit about me and what this is, if you don't know. My name is Eric Renier. I run the website, thewrit.ca. I am running this website, which is just focused on elections in Canada, sometimes elsewhere, but primarily in Canada. You can go check out thewrit.ca. You can see the work that I do there. I have a podcast every week. I have articles that go up on the site. And if you subscribe to the website, you get access to everything there. And just a couple more hours, you can subscribe and save 12% on a subscription, a yearly subscription. So if you want to subscribe to thewrit.ca, you can take advantage of the special offer. Otherwise, I'm happy to have you here tonight with me. So before I get to some of the stakes, because we are going to wait for the polls to actually start reporting, that could take a little bit of time before we actually start getting some results. The polls did close in Mississauga Lakeshore. Just to get through some of the comments you've made, Jordan Chan, he asked, for Pierre Poilievre, he hasn't really campaigned in Mississauga Lakeshore. Now, this is true. He did make one stop in the riding, but he wasn't there, for example, in the last weekend. Now, Justin Trudeau also made one visit to the riding, which is actually something that he's done in other by-elections, which is rare. Prime ministers in the past didn't run or didn't campaign in by-elections very often. He has done it, and he's made it something that he does in every by-election. So we've seen about the equal attention from both Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre. But we have seen that the Liberals have sent some cabinet ministers to campaign in Mississauga Lakeshore, so clearly they want to put some effort into it. The Conservatives have had some of their higher profile MPs also visit the riding to give a hand to Ron Chinzer, but I think that the Conservatives would be smart to lower expectations here, because if they win, it's a big surprise, it's a big upset, it's a great show for the party. If they lose, and they've already signaled that they aren't trying too hard, then they can say that it wasn't a riding they were supposed to win anyway. Now, throughout the night, you might see my cat jump on me. She was actually right here on the floor, so she might become problematic at some point. No problem there. Looking at some of the questions again and some of the comments, people from all over the world, which is nice to see. Chicago and Birmingham, England. I will continue to go through this. Gracchus Gaia says, which of the two main contenders has the most at stake here? Would a loss be more damaging to the Grits or the Tories? So I guess that's a good place to get to the stakes here. All right, so this riding, Mississauga Lakeshore, has been with the Liberals since 2015. They won it by a pretty healthy margin in 2015, about 7 points. The Conservatives were the incumbent there, Stella Andler. They won it by an even bigger margin in 2019 by 11 points, and then they won it by 6 points in 2021. So 44.9% for the Liberals to 38.7% for the Conservatives. The Liberals should win this riding if they're forming government. It is somewhere around 123 on their list of ridings. So in terms of how winnable they are, so they need to be winning 123 ridings if they're going to be forming a government. Might not even be enough, though. So you can see that Mississauga Lakeshore is pretty early on in the list for the Liberals. Normally, if you want to form a minority government, you probably need to have around 140 seats. So for the Liberals, this is the kind of one that they need to win. For the Conservatives, it ranks 149th. Now, they didn't win 149 seats last time, but if Pierre Poilievre is going to become the prime minister, he's going to need to win probably at least 140, 150 seats to form a minority government, and to form a majority government, which he might need if he can't get support in the House, then he needs to get 170 seats. So Mississauga Lakeshore is the kind of seat that the Conservatives need to win to form a government. So that's why the stakes are pretty high here, because whoever wins, it's a good sign for that party that they can win another election. Now, who has the most at stake? It's always the incumbent party, the Liberals, they're the government. They should be trying to hold this by-election, and if they lose it, then that's bad news for them. If they can hold on to it, that's good news for them, but it's kind of what you'd expect for them to do, is to hold this kind of riding. So I'd say that there's more at stake for the Liberals. A loss here hurts them more than it hurts the Conservatives. But if Pierre Poilievre is trying to build a narrative that he is on track to become the prime minister in 2023, 2024, and 2025, whenever the election is, he needs a win in a seat like Mississauga Lakeshore to show that he can do it. This is the best riding that the Conservatives had in Mississauga in the last few elections. Doug Ford won it in 2018. He won it again just in June. So it is a riding that can vote Conservative. So I think that's really what's at stake here tonight, is whether it's going to be a good night for the Liberals or the Conservatives, because it's casting forward to the next general election. Meg highly recommends a subscription, and you can trust her very much. I trust her as well. So let's continue to go through some of these. Oh, this one's fun. Ethan Waba says, what result do you think is most likely to cause an early election, potentially this spring? I don't know. I don't think that an election call is going to come because of what happens in Mississauga Lakeshore. And if there is an election that is called, it's because the Liberals want to or the New Democrats want to, right? It has to be one of those two. If for some reason the NDP wins the seat, then maybe they'll bring down the government. But they've only managed 8%, 9%, 10% in the last few elections. Not expecting a lot from the New Democrats. Now for the Liberals, if they walk away with this riding, 55, 60%, I think that they would be wiser to chalk it up to the oddities of a by-election than to say, let's go in the spring for another election. So I don't think that what happens here will impact election timing. So you can see that in the on the window that I have on the Elections Canada website, that it is refreshing now and then. It's going to auto-refresh throughout the evening, and there's no results yet. Not a surprise. The polls closed. They're starting to count. Takes a little while to report the first numbers. Alexandre Olivier asks, could the PPC cost the Conservatives by-election like in some 2021 races? There was about, I can't remember the exact number was, but when I looked at it pretty deeply, I came to the number of about 7 ridings where the Conservatives had enough of the vote, or the People's Party had enough of the vote, and enough of that vote would have gone to the Conservatives that it cost the Conservatives the seat. Not every vote that went to the PPC was a Conservative vote that was lost. So you can't do a one-to-one comparison. So there was about a half dozen at least. Now, if this is really close, it's possible the People's Party candidate, Khaled Al-Sudani, could be a spoiler here. They had 4% of the vote in the last election. The margin was 6 points in this riding, so the PPC didn't cost the Conservatives Mississauga Lakeshore in 2021. But if we do see that it's very, very close, if it comes down to just 100 votes, and the People's Party has 300 votes or more, then we could be looking at that chance. But I think that with the People's Party, we're expecting not a great result for them. Down, because we've seen it in the polls, they're down from where they've been in the last election. So if the PPC would cost the Conservatives the vote in Mississauga Lakeshore, it would be because it is just so close. And in that case, you could probably look at the other parties too and make the same case and wonder how many of those votes going to independent candidates by mistake might have cost the election for one of the parties or the other. What site is that map? Uruguay Hockey asked. This is from electionatlas.ca. It's election-atlas.ca. It's run by JP Kirby. It's just a fantastic resource. I use it all the time. You can go through the history of ridings throughout the country. You can look at by-elections. You can look at provincial elections. You can look at poll-by-poll numbers. It's just terrific. So highly recommended. I've used it before on my streams, so check that out. That's a good place to go throughout the night. Floriella says that they had a good candidate last time, the Conservatives, Michael Ross, in the last election. And, it's possible that the candidate makes a big difference in general elections. It's especially the case in by-elections, I'd say. When you look at the Conservative numbers over the last few elections, so in 2015, 41%, 2019, 37%, 2021, 39%. It's a pretty solid chunk of vote. That's somewhere around the 37 to 41% mark that the Conservatives get in election after election in Mississauga Lakeshore. And it's the same thing for the Liberals. 48% in 2015, 48% in 2019, 45% in 2021. So that's the big question. Are either of those parties going to get knocked off that traditional base of support that they get in vote after vote after vote? And if that happens, who's going to end up winning the election? If we see that the Conservative numbers are low and the Liberal numbers are high, then it might suggest that either the Liberals got their vote out or they were able to take some votes away from the Conservatives, and vice versa. I'm getting some more questions here. I'm just trying to follow along, so excuse me if I'm reading for a little bit. Oh, yes, this is good. Shred130 asks, do you think that some independents will get more votes simply because the name is physically around a mainstream candidate, or worse, because they're near the top of the ballot? It's possible that some people could just make the mistake and give the vote to the person who's one away. But the one that I think is really key is near the top of the ballot. I've written about this before because there was a study that was done a few years ago, and it found that when you have independent candidates, the person at the top of the ballot tends to do best. Second person does pretty good, and the last person does pretty good. It's everyone in between that gets kind of screwed by it. So it's really dumb, but what it shows you is that people see a long list of names. If they don't really care, they'll tend to pick one at the top, pick one at the bottom, not one in the middle. So among the independents here, we have Melody Anderson, who's the first on the ballot. I think Khaled Al-Sudani might also be very high on the ballot, but Melody Anderson is the first independent on the ballot. So to test this theory, this is one of the fun for me, and hopefully for you, but fun things to watch will be, will Melody Anderson be the top independent candidate? And if so, it's almost certainly because her last name is Anderson. And then you look at the people in between, like Donovan Ekstrom, Carrie Hildebrandt, Alain Lamontagne. It's not going to work for them. Maybe Darcy Justin Vanderwater. He might do okay because he's last. So that's a little bit of a B card thing to watch throughout the night. One of the things I was wondering is, all these names, does it cause more ballot spoilage? People mistakenly mark two names. In St. Boniface, St. Vital, where this happened in 2021, where they had 21 candidates on the ballot, the percentage of spoiled ballots was exactly the same as the provincial average, so it doesn't seem to have much of an impact at all. Robin Zhang asks, by what margin of Liberal victory will it actually be a bad night for the Conservatives? I would say that anything, like the margin was 6 points last time. If the Conservatives close the gap to 4 points or 3 points, that's not bad. They'd probably still not be able to win enough seats with that, though, if you expanded that and did the same thing elsewhere. If the margin increases, then you're just looking at more seats for the Liberals, less for the Conservatives, if we're thinking about the swing. But it is a by-election, so just little changes don't matter that much to me. If we see that, the Conservatives do 1 or 2 points better or worse, you kind of chalk it up to the special circumstances of the by-election, rather than say it's a big sign of drop or increase of support. So I think if the Conservatives can get it to at least 3 points, that would be a good result for them. Anything above 3 to 6, it's not a big sign that they're making the progress they need. If the margin grows, that's a problem for the Conservatives. If they win it, it's obviously a good thing. Now, if we see some of the vote move around and there's an increase for the Liberals and the Conservatives, but the margin changes, then that gets kind of confusing. And it'll take a little bit more analysis to see. But I think for the Conservatives, anything that's 6 points or more in terms of the margin, that's bad for them. If it's 6 to 3, not great either. Shanti Fernando asked, did Trudeau visit and campaign in the riding? Yes, he did. It was, I believe, earlier on in the by-election campaign, but he did visit. And he does make a point to visit other by-elections. So I've been talking for a little while, so I just want to reset a little bit. So what you're looking at on the side, this is the Elections Canada website. It'll refresh throughout the night, waiting for our first results. What you're seeing just above me is from the electionatlas.ca. It's just showing Mississauga Lakeshore, the results from the last election, where it is, and I'll probably refer to it later on in the stream. And I'm obviously Eric Grenier from the writ.ca. Please check out the writ.ca if you want. There's a link to a special offer, save 12% off subscriptions to the writ. There's a link to it in the description for this live stream, so you can check it out if you want. Okay, I'm going to get back to some of your questions here. Some of you have... when will the results come? We're all waiting for that. I'd say it's going to come soon because it usually doesn't take that long. So it should come pretty soon. Are any of the political parties, this is Andrew JS, in favor of preferential voting, also known as ranked choice voting? Well, the Liberals sort of were during that electoral reform debate, and Justin Trudeau said that was his preferred option. And if I remember, it's been a few years now, the Liberals on the committee suggested that was maybe the way to go. No one else wanted to do that, and that was that. So, and just as a reminder, this is why there's so many candidates on the ballot. Why there's 34 extra independents, by my count 34, in addition to the 5 from, at least 34. There's 5 from the major parties. There's someone as well running from the Rhinoceros Party. Sébastien Corriveau is the leader of the Rhinoceros Party. He's leading this effort to have all these independents on the ballot. It's a record. There's never been 40 people on a ballot before in Canada, at least in a federal election. Anthony Quoto asks, if the Conservatives somehow won a majority without the GTA, which other cities, regions could deliver them their majority? That's a thinker of a question, because the GTA has so many seats, you almost need them to win a majority. But the Conservatives could maybe find those seats in Quebec. That would be the other kind of option. Let's imagine a scenario where the Conservatives have the support that they have now. So they won 119 seats in the last election. Let's say they replaced the Bloc Québécois. Let's just say they did it. They became a nationalist Quebec party, as well as a party, a national federalist party. Then they would get up to the amount of seats they would need to win an election. So you can kind of imagine that happening, I suppose, where the Conservatives could not win in the GTA, but win by just getting the massive kind of Brian Mulroney numbers in Quebec. It's just hard to imagine how that would happen. So that's why the GTA is so important for the Conservatives. If they don't win in the GTA, that means they're not winning in the Greater Vancouver region, probably. It means they're not winning in mid-sized cities like Kitchener-Waterloo, London, suburbs here in Ottawa, where I am, suburbs in Winnipeg. It means they're probably not clearing Calgary and Edmonton. So it would be a sign of a bigger problem for them. They need the GTA. They don't need Toronto. They could probably still form a government without a single seat within Toronto. But if they're not winning at least a couple seats in Brampton and Mississauga, Oakville, Markham, Vaughan, those areas, they're not forming a government. It's just as simple as that. It's the same thing with the Ontario PCs. They need the GTA in Ontario to form a government. It's just mathematically impossible, of course, for them. Colin Carmichael asks, does the lack of a star candidate for the CPC indicate a weakness for Poilievre's leadership in the 9 to 5 in general, and Mississauga in particular? I don't think that the lack of a star candidate is necessarily a big problem. The Conservatives do have a bit more of I'm not sure if what rules they have exactly, but they nominate their candidates, right? And local party members can choose the candidates. The leader, I think, has an ability to step in now and then. But the fact that they didn't have someone who's renowned across the country to step in and run here, I don't think that's necessarily a problem for the Conservatives. If the Liberals had just found a normal name that is not known outside of Mississauga, just a generic Liberal candidate, that would not have been a big shock. But I think the test is the next election. If Pierre Poilievre is on the way to form government, he should be attracting star candidates to run for him in 2025 or whenever it is. If he's not doing that, that would be a problem. Ross Shearer, he says, rest in peace, Jim Carr. Yes, that was news we had today, which is sad news from Ottawa. Jim Carr, who was the MP from Winnipeg South Centre. He was there first elected in 2015 for the Liberals. He was a cabinet minister for a while. He passed away today. He had suffering from cancer. So it's very sad that Jim Carr passed away. Never want to see that. He was 71 years old. So yes, condolences to Jim Carr's family and friends. Never a thing to see. You never want to see that happen to anybody, obviously. But he was generally well seen. I think people saw him as at least a nice guy. I've interacted with him, I believe, once, and he was very pleasant. And that's that. Grakaskayas, will today's results tell us anything about the state of the PPC, the Greens, and the NDP? That's where I'm going to spend less time on, both tonight and analysis tomorrow. Smaller parties, they tend to do really poorly in these kinds of by-elections because there's the sense that they don't have a chance to win, so there's less of a motivation to vote for them. They're not part of a national campaign. So if we see bad results for the NDP, the Greens, or the People's Party, it doesn't necessarily suggest bad things for them. Obviously, they'd prefer better results. Do you have a link for the results, Tanker Boss? If you go to elections.ca, you can get to the same page that I have here. Oh, that's a good point. The Floriella says that because there's two columns, there's going to be people at the top of the list, two different people at the top of the list. So that's a good point. It's not just going to be Melody Anderson who has the best chance. And it says Martin Asataria, Caesar Jubainville is at the top of the second column, so we'll keep an eye to see if that person does better. Nico Johnson, you're asking me about a poll today that had the Conservatives ahead. I haven't seen it, so you're going to have to tell me which poll you're talking about. Otherwise, I'm not going to comment on something I didn't see. Well, George Tadros said, will this extensive ballot slow down the counting substantially? I don't know. Probably a bit. Probably a bit. Sid says, with the Conservatives seemingly doing better in Ontario polls recently, does a bad result tonight cast doubt on those, or maybe just mean their vote is becoming even more inefficient? I think that a by-elections to me are a proof point. Right? So if we do see that the polls in Ontario have been a little bit better for the Conservatives than before, but the by-election results don't match it, it suggests to me not that those polls are wrong, but that they might not be, it puts a little bit of a doubt that they are really capturing something real. It is just a by-election, but this is a very Ontario riding. I don't know how else to put it. But so if we don't see the Conservatives doing well here, it would make me think that maybe when actual people had to vote, their results weren't as good. Maybe we should pay attention a little bit more to that than to polls that have smaller sample sizes at the provincial level and a lot more variation. Morgan Zada says, by-elections are typically a bad indicator of a general federal election, right? That is not my view. Now, there's always by-elections that are different, depending on the candidate. Enemy Paul, for example, did really well in the Toronto Centre by-election. Didn't quite end up that way on election night. But I think if you're looking at the overall trends in by-elections, they do tell a pretty good story. Parties that do better in by-elections between general elections tend to do better in the general election. Parties that do worse in by-elections tend to do worse in general elections. So while it's not a one-to-one, like the Liberals are down 5 points, which means they're down 5 points everywhere, if they're getting bad result after bad result in by-elections, it probably means they're not going to do that well in the general election. So it's not a terrific predictor, but it is one indication that's going forward. And Philippe J. Fournier says good evening to me. So bonjour, Philippe. I'm happy to have you watching and looking forward to speaking with you next week on the podcast. Don't forget. If you could pick a riding, Jordan Chan, if you could pick a riding to have a by-election, which one would you pick and why? Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I'd probably do one of the Kitchener ridings. I find the Kitchener ridings seem to be pretty good bellwethers. Peterborough, I guess, would be the ultimate bellwether. So that would be another good one. Yeah, I think that's probably the kind of ridings I would want to see. But what I'd really love is a lot of by-elections across the country taking place at once. Like a little midterm election. See, this is actually an idea I have. I'll share it with you here tonight for the first time. That all the by-elections, all the vacancies that happen in the course of a year should all have a by-election on the same day in October at the same time that we have federal elections. So, the third Monday or whatever it is. And just have by-elections be part of our political season, that it comes once a year in October. All the by-elections take place at once. You wouldn't have vacancies, less than half of the vacancies, probably about less than half, because people would probably time it on purpose, would be vacant for more than 6 months. And it would just be a way to get people used to politics happening in October in Canada. That's my idea. I wonder if it would save some money. Now we're still waiting for some results. Someone has to tell me, because it feels like this is longer than usual, but I could just be Pulling that one out of my behind. Burlington, nah. Keep going through the list. Curtis Frick, hello from Polling Canada. Very good place to follow the polls. My favorite chocolate bar, Coffee Crisp, I guess, or maybe caramel, like that. Continuing to look, we're still looking for some results here. So, here's one. Do you think Doug Ford will be a factor in this by-election? I think that if we see that the Conservatives do quite poorly, that we'll see. We already saw some telegraphing of that in the Toronto Star. Oh, we got our first results. First results, we got 3 votes for Charles Sousa, 2 votes for Ron Chinzer, and 1 vote for Julia Cole. I think that if you had 6 people vote in this riding, this would probably be the result. So there you go. There's an abacus poll out this morning. I didn't see it. 36-30-19 for the Conservatives. Well, that's a good sign for the Conservatives if we see that from other polls. We just haven't seen consistently a lot of numbers that have a 6-point lead for the Conservatives. We'll see what happens. If, when you have the parties around that, let's say like the actual place where the parties stand is 32-34, then you would see these kinds of numbers every so often, right? So but we've seen the Conservatives are probably leading, just as they won the popular vote, or the national popular vote. I know people always get on that, but the national vote share in the last couple of elections, but a 6-point lead, it depends on where it is. They could probably squeeze out a minority government with that. I think we have a local voice saying lawn signs, the Greens have okay numbers, but the NDP and PPC have noticeably less signs than they had in federal 2021. And Golden Gales is disappointed there's no CCF on the ballot. That's true. Could always bring them back. Still, so we do have our first result. Now this is probably a special poll, because there's only 6 votes in it. And for a box to have just 6 votes in it means it was not an advanced poll or a district poll. It was probably, an old folks' home or people who had to vote from overseas or something like that when you have this kind of results. All right, well, we are talking about that abacus poll. I'm a little behind in the comments, I think. I'm trying to keep up, and I wanted to get to everybody, but I'll try to keep it more... Oh, this is a great question. Nicholas Lindsay Clark, what is your favorite historical by-election? It's a great question for me. I love reading political history. And if you go back a long time ago, the by-elections were like huge deals. Like party leaders would go, they'd have big debates, they'd put all this effort into it. It's sad that we don't have that anymore. But I was reading about a by-election, and I'd have to look it up, but it was sometime in the 50s or 60s, or it could have been in the 40s. And it had to do with the créditistes who were running. And it's a story about being chased in a hotel by people from the other party. That one of the créditistes people was beaten up. It's just a nuts, crazy story. I'm going to have to write about it at some point. So we got a few more polls. It's going to be a long night if it takes this long. And Sousa's now at 9 votes. 6 votes, a 3-vote gap. Ron Chinzer with 6 and Julia Cole with 2. Hey, the NDP's keeping pace. Not too bad right now that they're still at 12% of the vote with 2 votes in. Andrew says, are the votes counted by hand or by machines? No, they're counted by hand. At the provincial level, they're counted by machines. They go through that machine that tabulates the results, but federally they still have people counting the ballots and reporting the numbers in. At least that's what I remember it being. Oh yeah, the 1942 York South federal by-election. That's a good one. That's when Arthur Meehan was running for the Conservatives. He was the leader of the party. He had been renamed the leader of the party after being out of it for a decade and a half. And he ran in York South. He was supposed to get into the House, lead the Conservatives again, take the Conservatives into the next election, which would be 1945. And what happened is that the Liberals decided, no, we're going to stand out of this election. We'll give the way to Arthur Meehan. But the CCF, well, they're going to put a candidate in. And oh boy, we're going to give some help to the CCF. And so the CCF actually won that by-election with the help of the Liberals. And Arthur Meehan had a loss. He resigned. He did not become leader of the Conservatives again. And so what happened after that, just to get into a little political history, was that when they had a leadership race in 1942, the Conservatives went to Manitoba to find the Premier, John Bracken, who was leading a progressive government. This was a party that was kind of liberal, but kind of farmer populist as well at the time. And he agreed that he would run for the Conservative Party in 1942 as their leader if they renamed them the Progressive Conservative Party. The party agreed. John Bracken became the leader. He turned out to be a failure. But that's why you have progressive conservative parties in Manitoba, Ontario, and throughout Atlantic Canada. It's because of Arthur Meehan losing in York South and John Bracken becoming the leader of the Conservatives, the National Conservatives, in 1942. So we're still waiting on a bit more results. There's lots of good by-elections being brought up. That's true. 1990, Laurier-Sainte-Marie, that's Jules Duceppe, winning as an independent, though he was really the Bloc candidate. They hadn't registered yet. And that was really the first sign that the Bloc could get some real votes and not just be a party that people talked about. Amanda R. says, Eric, for general elections, is winning in Quebec the only way to overcome the might of the 905? Is there a plausible alternative strategy? It depends on the party. The Conservatives showed in 2011 that they could win without Quebec. They won 5 seats. They didn't need them for a majority government, but they did very well in the GTA. The Liberals probably need Quebec because even when they win the GTA, they need those extra seats because of the disadvantage they have by not winning any seats in Western Canada. So for the Conservatives, Quebec is like a nice to have, and it makes things easier for them. But for the Liberals, it's a need to have. The 905, I think, is a need to have for everybody, barring some very strange electoral map that is too hard to imagine right now. Arush Walia says, what's the difference between the CCF and the NDP? So the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation was the party started in 1930s. It was a socialist party, but it was very farmer-based. It was very popular in Western Canada. And in 1960 or 1961, it joined the CCF, was seeming like an old brand, and it joined with the Canadian Labour Congress, and together they formed the New Democrats. So the New Democrats are the successor to the CCF, the old CCF party. And in a lot of ways, they're the same, but it was an attempt to have Labour brought into the CCF in a way that it wasn't as much before. And I see that some people are answering the questions already, so. Ryan, do you think by-elections in the U.S. are more predictive than in Canada? I'm guessing by that you mean midterms. Midterms seem to follow a clock in the United States. The governing party does badly, unless you're the Republicans, unless you're Republicans in this past election. But there is much more of a clockwork to it. So I don't know if it's all that predictive. But if you see a tail, this is my cat. This is my cat Marsui. Anyway, she's sitting on me, and now she's gone. But we're still only waiting. It is a little puzzling that we're now 40 minutes in. We got 17 ballots counted, 2 polls reporting of the 234. So a long ways to go just yet. That's quite a ways to go. 4001 or 4001, the 1989 Alberta federal by-election. That was Deborah Gray in, I'm going to say something, if someone remembers the name of it, I can't remember what it was. Anyway. Oh, yes, the by-election in Chambly in 1990, that's the asterisk, when Tom Mulcair won in Outremont in that by-election. It was the previous time the NDP had won was in 1990 in Chambly and blah 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 blah. But now they have a bit more. Now they have a bit more of a history there. No, not as much anymore. Yeah, maybe it does take longer to count 40 ballots. Maybe the Rhinoceros Party guy should have taken that into account, thinking of poor people like me who are doing live streams. But once it starts coming in, it'll start coming in pretty quick, right? Because once the first boxes start to be counted, boxes, of hundreds of votes, then hundreds of votes are going to start coming in pretty quickly at a time. Oh, a tie in Assiniboia West in 1896, where the returning officer broke the tie. We saw that recently. It wasn't in a. I don't think it was a. I can't remember. No, it was. It was in Yukon. There was a result in Yukon that had to be decided by a coin flip, I believe, or picking from a hat. And this was like recently in a recent election, and it was important. Beaver River, yes. I knew it was Beaver something. I didn't want to say it because otherwise it would make me sound weird. Are you going to be doing a live stream tomorrow for Kirkfield Park? I'm afraid, Clark, no, I will not do a live stream for Kirkfield Park. The good people in Manitoba will have to watch the results of that by-election without me. The fact that there's a time difference makes it all the more difficult. I don't like by-elections that happen in Western Canada because the polls close when I want to go to bed. See, Diego Armando says... Oh, he does not think it would be good. Does he? I'm not sure. Asking if I do think fixed by-election dates are a good idea. Even if, yes, a riding would be vacant for longer than 6 months, which is now the limit, still, I don't know. I think it would be more fun. Why not try to make politics a bit more fun, get people a bit more interested, give reasons to be a bit more interested. People will remember that October is when there's a by-election, and, they might tune in a little bit. Politics is really important, but you can't just get people important by saying that eating vegetables is really important. You got to give people something fun as well. That's what I try to do. That's what I think a lot of you agree with. It's fun to follow this stuff. Let's try to make it a bit more fun. Brian Senkow says, why hasn't Elections Canada gone to electronic voting like everyone else? It would help us all out, and you tonight. I don't agree with that. Ontario and New Brunswick both have the tabulators, and the results come in so fast. And I know it's better that the results come in fast because who needs to wait? It's not much fun. It's more fun to have to... Again, it goes to my thing. Why have an election night show that takes 2 hours when you can have an election night show that takes 4 or 6? And I know people who have been on it would hate that, but I love it. Again, why not try to get people interested in politics? And once they get interested in the competitive side of it, they can get interested in the policy side of it. That's my view, and that's always what it's been. But also, they don't want to go to electronic voting for fear of errors, hacking, all this kind of stuff. And I agree with them. Paper and pencil is working pretty good. Compare us with a lot of places, especially south of the border. We do our elections pretty good. People can disagree about the systems and all that, but just with the process itself, I think we're pretty good. All right. Oh, someone asked me, ever thought about running? When you see what politicians do now and what they go through, it's remarkable that anybody wants to run, and good on them if they do. Hey, Zane Velge's here. Hey, Zane. So we're just talking about, by-election history as we're waiting for more than these 17 ballots to be counted. So right now, Charles Sousa has a commanding 3-vote lead over Ron Chinzer. 33 votes now. See, you people in the chat might be a bit ahead of me. No, that wouldn't make sense. No, I'm behind you. So once this thing results, I'm not going to jinx it by trying to refresh myself. I'll let the process happen naturally. So here we go. New results coming in. There you go. Boom. We are up to 33 votes. Charles Sousa, 14 votes, 42.4%. Ron Chinzer, 11 votes, 33.3%. And, we got some votes for the independents, people. So, Melody Anderson, 1 vote. Roger Sherwood, 1 vote. Julie Saint-Amand, 1 vote. Ben Teichman, 1 vote. So it's a tight race among the independents. But Melody Anderson does have a vote. I'm telling you, she's going to finish first because of the independents, because she's top of the ballot. Though we do have to watch for that other guy someone mentioned is on the top of the other column. No bloc majoritaire. Well, we'll see. Maybe there'll be some write-ins. There's no write-ins. Every special ballot is going to be counted before we get a single. Yeah, probably. It's the way it's going. I did ask Elections Canada about the mail ballot. So there was about. They received about 940 mail ballots. And I was wondering if they weren't going to count them until the next day, but they said that they will count them the same day. So we're not going to be waiting on anything like that. So let the youth vote or join or vote on TikTok. Yeah, that seems like a good idea. Isn't that yeah, anyway. Isn't that company not run by a Canadian company? Let's just say that. I think the by-elections Calgary Heritage and Winnipeg South Centre will happen on the same day. Probably. In the past, the government has, if I recall correctly, in almost every case, they called all of the by-election, all the vacancies at the same time. So I would imagine that Calgary Heritage, we're still waiting on that MP to actually resign, if I'm not mistaken. He said he was going to, but he hasn't yet. And of course, with Jim Carr passing away, there has to be a by-election within 6 months. So there'll probably be some by-elections in the spring. We'll see. Eric Gilmore asks, are all the independent voters in the riding or the candidates? No, they're not. There's actually a Twitter account. It's called the Longest Ballot Committee, I think, or something like that. And they have a map that shows that their candidates come from across the country, which is allowed. Which is kind of bizarre, but it's allowed. And they're kind of, using that loophole to be able to get this huge list of candidates. And I'm just seeing my cat. She is on something she really shouldn't be on. But I can't do anything. Anyway. What do you think of lowering the voting age to 16? I mean, I don't have any objections to it necessarily. If I think the earlier you get people to vote, the better. And if you're someone who wants to vote at 16 or 17, then you're probably someone who should vote at 16 or 17. If we can let people drive at 16 or 17, then we can probably let them vote if they want to. And it happens in other countries and not the end of the world. I don't see the problem with it. If it ends up just increasing the odds slightly that people will vote for the first time, then I think that's a good thing. Meryl Streep, probably not Meryl Streep, asks how come one man was able to act as the agent for some 20 candidates? Is that legal? Yeah, as other people are saying, yes, it is. It's just the way the rules work. It kind of makes sense. Let's say that I wanted to run in a riding that's just 2 streets down from me because I live in a city. That makes more sense. Maybe I work there, or maybe I used to live there or something. Does it really make sense that because I live 2 streets away, I couldn't run in that riding? Probably not. But in terms of the official agents, I think the kicker here was that they removed the amount that you had to pay, I believe, or if you didn't get your deposit back, something like that, which made it a lot easier to run. Someone who are in the chat seem to actually be among the independent candidates, so maybe you have the answers, but. Yeah, it is a little bit of a side story here. So we're now 50 minutes in, and we have 33 votes counted. So this is a good start for the night. So let me take this opportunity to direct you again to the writ.ca. This is where I do most of my work. And you can see right now that if you subscribe before now and midnight, you can say 12% off a subscription to the writ for the next 12 months. It's the 12th day of the 12th month. Save 12%. On the writ.ca. There's a link to the coupon or the special offer or whatever in the description. You can go to the site and subscribe and have my eternal gratitude. And also access to a bunch of stuff on the site, which is the whole point. Amanda says, do you think the federal NDP need a new leader to grow their seat count in the next election? I don't think that you necessarily need to just change the leaders all the time. Oh yes, sorry, just someone, the deposit that was deemed unconstitutional, and that makes it possible to run all these candidates. Otherwise, it would cost a ton of money to run all these people for fun. Anyway, to go back to the question, I don't think that you should change your leaders just for the sake of it. You have to have a good reason that the leader was not performing well, was not delivering. I think with Jagmeet Singh, you can make the argument that he has performed well as a campaigner. He hasn't delivered in seats for the party yet. They did get more of the share of the vote last time they did in 2019. So I don't think that changing the leader would help the NDP unless they got a much better leader who was better known and all this kind of stuff. I think that the NDP probably makes sense to give him at least one more chance to see what he can do. I think there is the possibility that Jagmeet Singh could lead the NDP to some good results in the future. If they have the opportunity, because the Liberal vote comes down, that kind of thing. But I wouldn't give up on him just yet. I think that when you see his personal numbers, he still is pretty well liked for a third-party leader. So I don't think it's time to throw in the towel with him just yet. And, the NDP has had, you think of their leaders that have been well-known, had the most success, Jack Layton, Ed Broadbent, Tommy Douglas. They ran for many elections. And in some cases, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, their best election, 1988 for Ed Broadbent, 2011 for Jack Layton, was their last one. Though who knows what would have happened with Jack Layton if he ran again. Happy Orange 1323 says Jagmeet is like Andrew Horvath, popular but will never win the election. I mean, it'll be hard for the NDP to win a general election. Let's just say that. They've never done it before. They've never really got close except for the 2011 election, which was kind of an anomaly. So for the NDP, the kind of situation they're in now is actually a really good situation. They get to influence policy and have the balance of power. That is what the NDP has always done best on. And I was listening to a podcast with Brian Topp. He was on with David Hurley on the Hurley Burley. It was a little while ago. But he made the point that if the NDP can get some of their policies enacted by the government, and even if they're punished in the next election, they still got their policies enacted. And the point that they're in politics is to change policy. So who cares if it hurts them at the ballot box or not, if they can get what they actually want to get done. I think that's a good, non-cynical argument. But obviously they would be able to do a lot more if they won an election. So we'll reset a little bit on this by-election itself because we're still waiting for some results, for a bit more results. There's not a lot right now. I'll recap. 42%, 14 votes for Charles Sousa and the Liberals, 11 votes for Ron Chinzer and the Conservatives, 33%. Julia Cole, only 10 votes behind with 12%. And we have, 4 independents that have a vote, which each gives them 3%. That is the best that they will do. Oh, I'm told more votes are coming. This is very exciting. We will wait. Boom. All right, that was a good poll for Charles Sousa, whatever it was. We're now only at 5 polls out of 234, so we still got a long ways to go. Daniel Gagnon, he picked up a vote. Charles Curry picked up a vote. These independents are spreading it around. Charles Sousa is at the top, 101 votes right now, 56%. Ron Chinzer is at 24% with 43 votes. Julia Cole at 13% with 23 votes. Mary Kidnew is on the board, 4 votes, 2%. And both Khaled Al-Sudani and Sebastian Coe-Rhino. And now my cat she is just doing the worst things right now. It's like she knows she's on camera. She never jumps up here. What are you doing? Get down. Anyway. It's close to her to get fed, so that's why she's bugging me. So it's off to the races for Charles Sousa, but again, he still has a long way to go at 5 polls out of 234. 2%, not nearly enough to start drawing some conclusions. Usually, I think, when you're trying to make a call on a riding, usually at more the 10% mark before you even start thinking about whether you might want to call it or not. And since we're only at five polls, it really depends on where it is. All right, if Marcy jumps back up there, I'll let her sit. But I think she was going to try to get on me anyway. It's nice that the record will have a record of her forever. She is an election fan. Oh, this is fun. Michael Easter, if you could pick any historical leader for each of PC, Conservative, Lib, NDP to create a firecracker election campaign, who would you pick? I think for the NDP, I think you'd go back to Jack Layton just because you kind of want to see if he could, pull it off again. But that I think would be fun to see. For the Liberals, in terms of campaigners, I mean, I think you'd want to see Wilfrid Laurier at his peak. Someone who had lots of support in English Canada and French Canada. I think that he would be someone you'd want to see. And then for the Conservatives as a campaigner, I mean, you'd probably think of Diefenbaker when you think about how he stormed the country in 1958. And it was very old-timey kind of campaigning, and he was even seen that way in 1958. But I think he would be... that would be a pretty interesting campaign. You got Wilfrid Laurier, John Diefenbaker, and Jack Layton. Not bad. I think that could do. Give us a nice feeling of different modern and older eras. Mandatory voting. Getting a couple questions about mandatory voting. For me, it's the kind of thing that sure, why not? But the ideal would be that we actually convince people to vote willingly, rather than have to make them vote. But if it was mandatory with, some small, or maybe even like an incentive, like you get a tax credit or something if you vote, which opens up weird things, I guess, too. But I think the problem is that people don't want to vote, not that they don't have to vote. We have to do more work to make sure people want to vote. It's as simple as that. And maybe there'd be ways to incentivize voting that we're not doing, but I don't know. All right. Still waiting to see some new elections, new results. So yes, the two names we're going to watch among the independents are Melody Anderson and Martin Assetera Cesar Jubainville, because they're in the top. Well, Jubainville is at the top of the right column, whereas Melody Anderson is the top independent on the left column. She might actually just be the top person. And studies have shown that the higher you are up in the ballot, when people don't have party indications, ways to clue them in to who to vote for, being at the top of the ballot, being at the very bottom of the ballot is the best place. So if we see that Melody Anderson does really well, this would help confirm. All right, so we're now up to 7 ballots, 7 polls, 3%, 300 votes counted. Charles Sousa is at 173, 57.5, and Ron Chinzer is at 78 votes, 25.9%. So the gap has increased between Chinzer and Sousa. So we'll see if this is going to continue. You look at the other results, they look kind of what you'd expect, right? 10% for the NDP. If I had to bet, that's probably where I'd say that they'll end up. If not a bit lower, it's harder for the NDP to get people to vote in by-elections where they're not competitive. The Greens right now are at 2%, 7 votes. Again, very, very, very early. That matches their result. And the People's Party at 1%, which, based on where they've been in the polls lately, this is what you'd expect. Among the other independents, we're seeing some other ones. Myriam Beaulieu is now on the board. Who else do we got? Just got a new vote. Julian Salodi also got a vote. Patrick Strzelkowski gets a vote. John the Engineer Turmel looks like his losing streak will not be reversed today. That's an interesting question from, again, not Meryl Streep, but probably, if it is Meryl Streep, well, that's pretty impressive. Ballot access laws in Canada where the major parties with the most support are easy to find and at the top of the ballot. I don't know. That sounds weird to me. If we could afford it for printing purposes, I'd have that randomized, but I imagine that would not be a reasonable thing to do and would probably cause lots of miscounts. But, I mean, the alphabetical seems to be Maybe they could just do random draws. Maybe that would make the most sense. They should do random draws for every riding to get the order. Oh, Grakaskay says he loves the readouts of the newsletters. Oh, thank you. Yes. If you subscribe to the writ.ca, you can save 12% between now and the end of the night by subscribing. There's a link in the bottom. Every Wednesday, I do the weekly writ, which is a rundown of all the latest news. I go through the latest polls. I go through, I do a riding profile. I do a milestone of for a premier or something that's coming up. And I do a historical capsule of a past election in Canada, which are my favorite to write. I really love doing them. And I also, what I'm doing now is doing voiceovers. So I read the weekly writ out loud, so you don't have to. So you can listen to it as you want. Now, this is the weekly writs for subscribers every Wednesday. The first one of the month is free to everybody, but if you want to get the weekly writ every week, you have to subscribe. And then you can hear me speak for less time than I'm having to do tonight. Splitting the Saint-Amand vote. Do we have multiple candidates? Oh, we do. We have 2 Saint-Amands. What else do we have? We have 2 Gagnons. Yeah, splitting the vote. It's like the communists and the Marxist-Leninists just never going to make it if they continue to be split this way. Anthony Quota, who do you think would make a good leader of the Quebec Liberals? Poof. I don't know. I mean, who would want to do it, I guess, is the first question. And of the people that have been talked about, I can't see a potential one really breaking through. I think the Quebec Liberals have some work to do. I'm not sure what their future is. Oh, my cat's name is Marsui. I named my cats after towns in the Gaspé Peninsula where I was born. Oh, Erica asks a good rhetorical question. What do you do if you have 2 family members running in the same ballot? I don't know. You get one of your parents to vote for one or the other, or at least to ensure that each candidate gets 1 vote. You have the one person vote for the other person. But if someone ends up with 0, that's going to be pretty embarrassing. So, I was hoping that after an hour I'd have a lot more done in terms of votes. On cue, some more ballots. We're now up to 9 polls, and the gap between, yes, the Gaspésie is very pretty. Thanks very much. I agree. The gap between Charles Suze and Ron Chinzer is about the same. We're looking at a gap of, 29 points. Suze is at 56.5%. Chinzer is at 27.8%. If those kinds of numbers hold, that's a very good result for the Liberals, which is more or less this kind of result would match what happened in 2004 when the Liberals won this seat very easily, and the Conservatives were still a new party, and that people weren't ready to vote for them yet. So that would be something to watch if we do see this kind of gap, because there really hasn't been a huge gap like that, even at the provincial level. Just looking at some of the results. In 2011, the Liberals won this seat by 15 points. In 2014, the Liberals won it by 18 points. In 2018, the PCs won by 7 points. And in 2022, the PCs won by 8 points. So for anybody to win by 20 plus points would be a pretty big upset in this kind of riding. So we'll see. I imagine that we're just getting some good polls because we're only at 9 out of 234. And turnout so far, 0.5%. It'll go up, but that's not very good. Speaking of turnout, there was, did we get a few more votes coming in? Oh, we're up to 10 polls now. And the gap is a little bit less than 29 points. It looks like it's more like, I'm doing math, more like 28, 27. I'm doing math live here. That there was about 9,000 people, 9,100 people who voted in the advance ballots, in the advance polls. So right there, so we got 9,100. Hey, if you remember this calculator, still got it, still use it. So we got 9,100 people who voted. The amount of registered people is nearly 90,000. So at the very least, turnout will be 10%. We know that for sure. Hopefully it'll be a lot higher than that. Yes, someone's saying that the amazing drive is around the 132 around Gaspé. It is an incredible thing to do. You have to do it. You drive the whole way around. You go on the north coast, which is just mountains, and the fleuve is just beautiful there. You get to Gaspé. Gaspé is a great place. The Parc Forillon is there. You can do lots of great stuff. Go to Percé. Percé is beautiful to see. Go to Ile Bonaventure. I think it's touristy. I'd say Gaspé rather if I were you. But Percé is just a great place to go. Just if you want to do the tourist thing, you see the Percé Rock, go to Ile Bonaventure. There's places to go. And then you keep going around. You go to the Baie des Chaleurs. And then you can end it by going back through the Matapedia Valley up back. It's just an amazing thing. It's a great place. Everyone should go and visit the towns that are named after my cats, both past and present. Okay. Oh, Nicholas says, would I ever do a meet and greet? Sure. But that would be pretty Ottawa specific. But I'm sure most of the audience, or a disproportionate amount of the audience, lives here in Ottawa. We're getting also, while we're talking tourism, Port Credit, Ryan Harkness saying, great place to go in the Mississauga area. So there you go. And Ryan says maybe the Liberal-friendly parts of the riding are reporting first. Actually, this will be an opportunity for me to go look at the Mississauga Lakeshore results in 2021. So if you see in the top corner, you should see this hopefully. I just clicked to see the riding by riding results. And if we look into it more closely, you can see that the Conservatives did win a lot of polls in the last election. They won the polls in the center of the riding, a little bit in the north. The Liberals did better in the south and along the shore, most of the places. So if some of these polls that the Conservatives did worse in are the ones that are reporting, then that's where it's possible that you could see these kinds of results where it's only, it's some of the better parts of the ridings for the Liberals that are reporting first. That is one of the things that we don't know when this is coming. This isn't like CNN. We got John King on the big board and he's popping, looking at Cuyahoga County and everything like that, and can know which places haven't reported yet. We don't know that. It'd be amazing if we did. Elections Canada, if you're watching, do that, especially for a by-election. Come on. You only got one. That would be amazing, but we don't know that. So it could be that the parts of the riding that are reported first are the ones that are better for the Liberals. That's why we still have to wait, because we are at 11 polls, 4.7%. Still got a long ways to go. And the gap now is more around, looks like 25, 26 points for the Liberals. So the gap is shrinking. It was up to around 29 at some point. There, Marcy is back. And looking at the independents, there's still a few that don't have some results yet. But among the independents with two, we have Melody Anderson, Miriam Beaulieu, Sean Carson. There, Marcy's about to get fed, so she's running off. Konrad Lukowski, Eliana Rosenblum, and Patrick Strauss-Kalski are leading the way with 2 votes apiece. Very good for them. But Charles Sousa is still quite far ahead. But it is still so early, even after an hour. So that's where we are. Oh, yes. Well, I did have I had the smart board sorted for the Ontario election, which was super fun. I really enjoyed doing that. That was a lot of fun. And yes, it would be fun to have an even smarter board. But see, the thing is, they have all night. They have all night to play with that thing. In the Ontario election, I think our show was only 3 or 4 hours, but a lot of it was speeches and all that. There's not a lot of time to play around and look at the results. So that's why we need really long election nights like in the UK. I love those. Oh, yes, Braden Boulanger. If there will be a similar coronation in the Ontario Liberal race for Nathaniel Erskine-Smith or Jeff Lehman. I mean, we'll see. We'll see what's going to happen there. We don't know the rules yet. We don't know the date. We don't know the timeline. That'll have a big impact on who's going to lead the Ontario Liberals. I imagine it won't be a coronation. Because with the Ontario NDP, you had a whole caucus. That is a large caucus, not 8 caucus members like in the Liberals. So I think it's much easier to get a consensus and to prevent or discourage other candidates from running forward. But in the Liberals, if you don't have support from the caucus, who cares? There's only 8 of them. So I'm imagining we'll see a contested race, which would be a lot more fun. But we'll see what happens with that one. Cobb County, how's that going? Yeah, I think it's gonna pull it off this one. All right, so we got a few more votes. We're now up to 12 polls, count them 12, and the gap is closing. People, all right, 53.9% for the Liberals, 30.7% for the Conservatives. So now we're looking at a gap of about 23 points. So that's gone down from about 29 earlier in the night, and we're seeing that. None of the independent candidates yet has 3 votes. But some of them are outpolling Sebastian Corriveau of the Rhinoceros Party. But the other parties looking at the NDP, 8%, the Greens, 2%, the People's Party, 1%. That more or less is what I would expect. BDF 21 says, he asked if the previous MP was popular, relevant among constituents. I can't speak to whether he was popular or relevant, but he wasn't a high-profile MP. When he retired and resigned was the first time I heard his name, which I think shows you that he wasn't a high-profile MP. He might have been high-profile in Mississauga, I don't know, but I don't think he was himself bringing a lot of votes. I think that his support, especially when you look at historical support in the riding, looked like generic Liberal support. Canada polling asked if I could personally pick a Liberal MPP to be leader, who would it be? That I don't know. For the Ontario Liberals, I mean, John Fraser has been the interim leader for a while, and he seems to have done a pretty good job of that, just in terms of being an interim. But in terms of running, I'm not familiar enough with the rest of them, to be honest, which is a bit of a problem too, right? Not big profile Liberals at the moment. Nathaniel Erskine Smith would be an interesting one. He's a bit of a different cat in Ottawa. One of the few MPs has been willing to sometimes vote against the party line. So that would be an interesting thing. I do appreciate that he tends to talk like a normal person. Take that for what it's worth. So we're still just at the 12 polls. 12 polls. Erica M. asked about the upcoming Winnipeg by-election. I'm not sure if you're talking about Kirkfield Park or Winnipeg South Centre, which sadly became vacant today after the passing of Jim Carr. He won that riding by about 20 points or so last time, so probably not a huge race. Kirkfield Park, which is a by-election taking place tomorrow at the provincial level in Winnipeg, is really interesting because the PCs won that riding, and they won it by a pretty wide margin. But the NDP, which is the main opposition party there, is leading in the polls in Manitoba, doing really well in Winnipeg. There's been enough of a swing in Winnipeg that the NDP could theoretically win a seat like Kirkfield Park. And if they do, that would kind of confirm those polls and that the PCs are in a huge amount of trouble heading to an election next October. So right now, we're at 53.9% for the Liberals. We're still extremely early. In the last election, they got 44.9%. So right now they're doing 9 points better. And there's only 5% of the polls are reporting, so still hugely early. I do wonder now if these long ballots are having an impact. The Conservatives right now at 30.7%. That is down 8 points from the last election. So that's a big 17-point swing between the Liberals and the Conservatives, which, if that holds, would be very, very good results for the Liberals, bad for the Conservatives. But still very early, so we're not going to draw any conclusions. The NDP is at 8% right now, so that would be down 2 points from where they were in the last election. The NDP always has a lot of trouble in by-elections where they're not really contesting it. This has long been an issue for them, especially in ridings like this where they are two-horse races between the Liberals and the Conservatives. You know, if you're an NDP voter and there's a general election happening, you know, you're swept up in the fact that it's a general election, you're voting for the leader, you know, the NDP will still be able to get its vote out in a riding like this. But in a by-election where you know the NDP is not going to win, they sometimes have a lot of trouble getting their vote out. And you could say the same thing for the Greens. And this is really the first test for the People's Party since the 2021 election, where they did pretty well, beat a lot of expectations, but probably had a lot of their support swept out from under them with the election of Pierre Poilievre as the leader of the Conservatives. We've seen polls that suggest that a lot of the gains that the Conservatives have made have come from past supporters of the People's Party. Eric Gilmore has word on the street that Election Canada is really struggling with the large ballot. I don't think anybody on the street is saying that in Mississauga, but that could be the case. I'm a little bit less able to follow news while I'm doing this, so if you do see any news, you could leave it in the chat. So, going through the list of 40 candidates, just as a reminder, here we go. We got some new results, finally. 14 of 234, we're only at 6% reporting. And the gap right now is about 24 points between the Liberals and the Conservatives, which is still a pretty wide gap. Charles Suze is now at 54.8%, which would represent a gain of roughly 10 points for the Liberals since the last election. The Conservatives' Ron Chinzer is at 31%, which would represent a drop of nearly 8 points. You have Julia Cole with 8%, Mary Kidnew of the Greens with 2%, and Khaled Al-Sudani of the People's Party with 0.6%. And of all of these independence candidates, no one has more than 2. Just as a reminder, this was a campaign that was led by the leader of the Rhinoceros Party, to have as many candidates running as possible in this riding to, in a way, protest the Liberals abandoning their electoral reform pledge from the 2015 election. They're able to get at least 35 independents are running, or 34 independents. Not all of them are affiliated with this. John Turmel, for example, is running. But at least I think 32 of them are part of this campaign. And they were able to set a record with 40 candidates. That's nearly twice the previous record, which was 21 candidates back in the 2021 election in the Manitoba riding of St. Boniface St. Vital. But it doesn't seem like they're having much of an impact right now. If you add them all up, you know, they might be getting to about 1% or so, but not expecting them to have a big impact. But they might be having an impact on the counting, which is seems to be slow to my eye, but we'll see if it starts getting quicker as more of these polls get counted. We are starting to see, I think, bigger polls starting to report, so this might be an indication that they're starting to get to the bigger boxes. And Morgan Zada says, do you think Poilievre didn't campaign at the riding because the Conservatives think they'll lose? So Poilievre did visit at least once, which is, you know, that he'd visit once, I think is at least required. I think it makes sense for them to not put too many expectations, because if they heighten the expectations and they don't win, then it's a bigger loss than if they lower expectations, which I think we've seen them do quite a bit. If you look at some of the reporting we've seen, some of the quotes from, you know, Conservatives, they've been downplaying their ability to win this riding, either because they don't think they'll win it or just because they think it's a good idea to have a nice surprise rather than just hype it up and then win anyway. So I think for the Conservatives, they were playing the odds that if they win it, it's an upset. If they lose it, they can try to shrug it off as, well, we weren't ever going to win this riding. But I do think that this is the kind of seat that if the Conservatives are going to form a government in the next election, they have to win a riding like Mississauga Lakeshore. It is not virtually, but it's really hard to imagine a Conservative majority government without Mississauga Lakeshore being blue. So if Poilievre is going to win a majority, he needs a seat like this. Even a minority, he probably needs. I've mentioned it before, but this ranked 149th on the Conservative list of ridings in terms of their margin of victory or defeat in the last election. And 149 seats would probably mean winning a plurality, right? A minority government. Whether they could actually form a minority government, that's an open question. They would need support from another party, but this is the kind of seat the Conservatives need to win. So they can downplay their ability to win it all they want, but if they don't win it, Pierre Poilievre remains as the opposition leader. And the same goes for the Liberals. They need to win this riding. If they don't win this kind of riding, they're probably not forming a government. That's pretty much all it is for both of these parties. So we got an update just right there. See, now we're starting to get larger polls reporting. We're now up to 17, so up to 7% of the vote, which is still not a lot, but Sousa's at 57.8%, and Ron Chinzer's down to 27.9%, so we're looking at a gap again of about 30 points, which I think might, aside from really, really early on, might be the widest we've seen. So we'll say 30 points is the benchmark now. So this would represent a increase of about 13 points for the Liberals and a drop of 11 points for the Conservatives. So that would be a huge swing if that kind of holds. But again, still very early. Parts of this riding were more conservative. Parts of this riding were more liberal. We don't know who is reporting where. Oh, we got a couple with 3. Miriam Beaulieu is now at 3 votes. Conrad Lukowski is also at 3 votes. Adam Smith, renowned economist, is at 3%. And John Trammell's on the board with 1. A few independents haven't yet got a vote. That's unfortunate for them. But we have Julia Cole of the New Democrats at 7% and the Greens at 2%. I know it is just the small little parties, but the Greens got 2% in the last election, 2.2. They're now at 2.3. So they're getting their tiny portion of the vote out in this tiny sample of this one riding. But the People's Party is not having as much luck. They're at 1%. They had 4% of the vote last time. So, it wasn't one of their better ridings. It would be, somewhat below average for them nationally. But yeah, it does suggest that the People's Party is going to have some trouble keeping their votes out. Am I going to call the election? I will tell you when I think it's over. But, the RIT doesn't make official calls. I know CBC and the other networks will make a call at some point, and if they do, you can tell me, because then maybe we can call it a day. But I wouldn't yet call it with just this amount of the vote in. I mean, it does look like the Liberals are going to have a better night than the Conservatives. But we're only talking about 260 votes at this stage, and that's not a huge amount of votes. It's over. People are saying it's over. No, not over yet. Never over. Not until the votes are counted. But if this was going to be a big swing over to the Conservatives, then you'd expect that at least some of these polls would be showing this, and we're not really showing anything like that just yet. But again, there's been a couple by-elections recently where the results did not turn out to be what people were thinking of as the night was going on. So I think that was the case, I believe, in the Athabasca by-election in Saskatchewan recently. There were some other ones where they had to call it, and they called it back. There was the result in the Quebec City municipal election not too long ago where they called it for the person who ended up losing. You do got to wait till a lot of the votes are counted. A lot more than this. A lot more than this. Yes, that's true. The Rhino Party did lose an opportunity to get some interesting names on the ballot. They do have an Adam Smith, but they don't have, as was mentioned, a Jean-Jacques Rousseau or a John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, or anybody like that. Because if you recall, in the 2019 election, they managed to get a candidate run against Maxime Bernier in his riding of Beauce, whose name was Maxime Bernier. And the whole purpose was to more or less, screw him over a bit. Didn't matter. He didn't end up getting enough of the vote to make a difference. But they managed to find a guy willing to run, put his name forward, named Maxime Bernier, in Maxime Bernier's riding. But so we're now up to 19 polls, 8%. The gap is getting wider. We're now at 31 points for Charles Sousa. He's at 58%. Ron Chinzer is at 27%. And the NDP is at 7%, the Greens at 2%, and the People's Party is at 1%. I'm just looking at some of your comments. Sorry if I'm yes, that's right. Access to early seat calls is a subscriber benefit. No, it's not. Okay, so among the independents, this little fun game, Patrick Strzalkowski, who probably has the most difficult name here, is leading with 5 among the independents. And after that, we have 4 for Konrad Lukowski, and then a smattering with 3, including Sébastien Corino, who's Corriveau, which is his actual name. But we're seeing that the gap between the Conservatives and the Liberals are now leading by a little over 31 points. So we're now at 20% of the ballots, the polls counted, 9% of all of the votes. So we're still pretty early on. And the gap is still only 300 votes. Now remember, there's 89,863 electors on the list. Now if we get a turnout of, let's say, 20%, which would be bad, but let's just say it's 20%, we're talking about 18,000 votes, right? So if you're at 18,000 votes, you are looking at a gap of nearly 6,000 votes or so between Sousa and Chinzer, if that's where we ended up tonight. So we're currently at a gap of 290-ish votes. Still a long ways to go. Anyway. Oh, I'm sorry, Patrick. I didn't realize you were actually on here. Well, your name, maybe you can give me a pronunciation of your name on here. Strzalkowski is how I'm saying it. You can let me know if that is correct or not. I try to get names correct, but it's tough. I follow a lot of international hockey, so some of these names I feel like I can pronounce, but sometimes I don't. Anyway. Jordan Chan asked why St. Boniface St. Vital was picked as the longest ballot riding in 2021. I don't actually know. That's actually a good question. I don't know why they chose that single riding. Maybe someone could let me know. I'm having some chats or some things on my phone. Curious if anybody's actually giving me information or just bugging me. Let's see. Oh, I got someone who's a reporter. Was talking to someone at Elections Canada. They're not having a technical problem. It's just too long. It's just taking long because the ballots are very big. but it says that the votes are probably going to start coming out very soon. So thank you to, I don't want to necessarily, anyway, thanks to this person who has texted me this information, someone I would trust. So there you go. It's taking a long time because the ballots are long. You're making life difficult for the poor people counting ballots. Volunteers at Elections Canada. Volunteer, well, they're paid. That's another thing. If you ever want to work for Elections Canada, they're always looking for people like this in elections to count ballots, to be the returning officers and all this kind of stuff. They do pay more than minimum wage, if I recall correctly. So, if you're a student, or you're just someone who's looking for to make an extra buck, see if Elections Canada or the provincial bodies in your area are looking for some people. Oh, sorry, Fudgebot, which one are you? I'm not sure. I'm not keeping track of anything. I don't want to anglicize anything as a French Canadian. That would be a very bad thing to do. Strakowski. Strakowski. Okay. I should have done a pronunciator thing before this. Anyway, so we were at 9% of the ballots counted, 22 polls reporting. I literally did think this would take a lot less time. I have to admit. I was like, maybe the stream will be about an hour. We're now up to an hour and a half. So let me take this time to remind you, head to the red.ca. That's where you'll have my full analysis of the results. I'll probably say some off-the-cuff things here, stream of consciousness kind of thing. But tomorrow morning, you'll have nicely written out thoughts, some numbers, a chart, and you can look at that if you're a subscriber to the red.ca. And you have 2 hours left. 2 hours left to save 12% off a subscription. It's a great stocking stuffer. You can print out stuff and put it right in someone's stocking stuffer right there. And, oh wait, Patrick's not, he's giving me not a, Straukovsky. All right. That is what I'm going to keep saying. Speaking of Straukovsky, he is pulling away with 6 votes among the independents. I feel like most of this audience is on the ballot. I would like to know how many of you who are on this ballot are actually watching. I think there's at least 2, maybe 3, depending on the commentary I've seen. So I guess I have only the best people who are really engaged in their democracy and are slowing up lives for the poor workers in Mississauga Lakeshore. We are now at 9%, 22 polls counted. We have a gap that is right now about 27 points for Charles Sousa. So that is a bit smaller than the 30-point gap we were looking at before. But so far, we've been around the 25 to 30 points between the two parties for the last couple of polls. So we'll have to wait and see if anything's going to start changing that, because we are at only 9%, and it's not. There we go. We're now over 10%. We're now in a really important place. So with about 10% of the votes or the polls counted, we are now at 55.8% for Charles Sousa. This represents a gain of 11 points since the last election, and would represent, I think, the Liberals' best result since at least 2004. I'd have to go check again what the result was in 2004. We have Ron Chinzer of the Conservatives at 28.7% of the vote, which is down 10 points exactly from the last election. So that is a big swing. That is not a good result based on where things are now. They're not going to stay that way. The NDP is at 6% of the vote. They were at 9.8 last time, so they're down a little bit, to be expected when they're not in the running. Oh, and I do see what everybody else is seeing right now. In a tight race for 4th place, we have Mary Kidney of the Greens with 23 votes, 2%, and Sean Carson. Yes, that's Sean Carson. 23 votes, also at 2%. He is taking off. That looks to me like probably a mistake. I have a hard time believing that whatever poll this was suddenly got 20 votes or so for Sean Carson. Unless this is like his apartment. which it could be, I suppose. Maybe someone can tell me, we got 3 candidates here. Tell me who this person is. Is this an error? But he is really making this an interesting race. Strelkowski, I'll get it by the end, Patrick. 6 votes now being left in the dust by Sean Carson, who is 2%. Yeah, Sean's family probably all trekked out to the polls one day. They went all to the same place. Vote early, vote often. Yes. I have no idea who Sean Carson is, but he is very well known in one part of Mississauga Lakeshore and was able to get all of his folks out to come and cast a ballot in support of him. And now I'm told he's from Etobicoke Lakeshore. So there you go. He carted them in on a bus, and there you go. That looks to me like a counting error when you see that kind of thing, but I guess we'll see. Yeah, Sean Carson is going to do pretty well if he can hold that, if it's not retracted. Anyway, you know, if we didn't have these extra 34 candidates, we wouldn't have as much stuff to laugh about tonight. But the ballots would have been counted faster. So I guess we get what we get, you know, what we deserve here. Keeping me up late. Okay, so it is now 10:06. We're now up to 10.7% of the votes counted. Our polls reporting, I should say, 25 of 234. 55.3% for Charles Sousa. Ron Chinzer's at 29.2%. Oh, Mary Kidnew is also here, assuming that's actually Mary Kidnew. I really think my audience is primarily by-election candidates, which is terrific. That's a lot of fun. But anyway, Charles Sousa, who's not probably on the live chat, is at 55%. Ron Chinzer is now at 22%, so we're at a gap of 26 points, which is a bit smaller than it was before. But still, again, in that 25 to 30 point mark, we're not seeing that shift around all that much. And news of the night is that Sean Carson is the top independent with 23 votes, tying Mary Kidnew of the Greens. And Patrick Strelkowski is at 7 votes among the independents. So see, this is going against the research, which has shown that if you're nearer to the top of the ballot, you're going to do better. Melody Anderson's only got 2 votes. She's only got 2 votes. So she's not getting a lot of these extra votes from people voting for independents. We have a few poor people who still don't have any votes. We have Mary Dejewski, Isaac Dupont, Donovan Ekstrom, still at 0. Donald Gagnon, who's trailing Daniel Gagnon by 1 vote. Samuel Joubinville has 0 votes. Alain Lamontagne has 0 votes. Marie-Hélène Lebel has 0 votes. Pascal Saint-Amand has 0 votes. A lot of these francophone names don't have 0 votes. Not really impressed with the people of Mississauga Lakeshore. Thomas Schuswitz, 0 votes. And Darcy Justin Vanderwater has 0 votes. Thomas Suchowitz, 0 votes. Yeah, that's Khaled Al-Sudani seems to have been at the top of the ballot, but you know he has a party, so you would expect that people would vote for him because of his party branding. But you know it's possible he's getting an extra vote or 2 because he's at the top of the ballot. But yeah, Melody Anderson is so far proving the research wrong. You know, it's fun. I'm enjoying that you guys seem to be having a lot of fun in the live chat, even without me keeping an eye on it. So that's terrific. I enjoy that. All right, so the next refresh is just 5 seconds away. So we'll see if we get some more ballots coming in. We are now going to be at 27 votes polls. So now we're starting to get a couple polls every minute or 2. So that's pretty good. We have a gap now that is 27 points between the Liberals' Charles Sousa and Ron Chinzer of the Conservatives. Shukovich. Okay. That's Thomas Shukovich. He has 0 votes. And John Turmel's up to 3. Yeah. Carson's stuck at 23. Oh, well, I'm happy you're having fun with me, Mr. Patrick. Okay, so 55.6% of the vote for Charles Sousa and the Liberals. This is a gain right now of just under 11 points. Ron Schinzer is at 28.4%, which would represent a gain of a loss of about 10 points for the Conservatives. I'm not going to call this yet. Still too early, I think, because we're still only talking about 350 votes or so. But I don't know. I think if this was going to be close, it probably should have been a bit closer by now, because we are at, excuse me if I'm a little congested, I think we all are in this world, 11.5% of the ballots counted, which is not a bad amount. But we only have 1,300 votes so far counted. So, you know, we're still waiting on a lot more ballots to be counted. We're now up to 29 polls reporting. And the gap, oh, see, there you go. The gap between Charles Sousa and Ron Schinzer is now at 24.5%. So we are seeing that come down a little bit. So, yeah. All right, I got carried away. I got impatient. Not going to call this yet. Not going to call this yet. That's for sure. All that Ron Schinzer needs is a good couple of polls to come in. And remember, the Conservatives did win a number of polls in Mississauga Lakeshore in the last election. And this gap starts to look a lot better. I don't think Sean Carson is going to win, though. I will call that Sean Carson will not be winning in Mississauga Lakeshore, though he might be the best placing independent, which may or may not be the result of a transcription error. But we will see. We've had it before. There was a time when, I can't recall which election it was. I think it was the Quebec election in 2018. I was on doing that show for CBC Montreal. And a candidate for, which party was it? I can't remember. But was suddenly first. It might have been like the Marxist-Leninists or the National or non-affiliated. Anyway, and it was just a transcription error. And the person wasn't actually winning, and they reversed it, and there you go. So these things actually do happen. And now as I see the next chunk, and we're out to 30 polls. Okay, we're starting to get a poll every minute and a half or so that's not too bad. But we're now at a gap of 25-ish points. So that's really where we are. Now, did they lead in Mississauga East Cooksville by error, or is it just because they got a poll in 2008? Yeah, no, I'm not thinking. That might be another case of that. I'm thinking of a different election that I was actually involved in watching. But it was relatively recently. Excuse me. That's very rude. I was very surprised during the Ontario election when the independent candidate, whose name escapes me now, was suddenly leading in that riding in southwestern Ontario. What was her name? Bobby Ann something. Anyway, and when it first came up, you always assume it's an error. You always assume it's a one poll reporting that's 3 votes and 2 of them are for a gray candidate. And but no, that was an actual. We actually hadn't had her photo in the system, the CBC election system, so it came up with just a blank person, and yeah, she ended up winning. It was totally legit. Bobby Ann Brady, that's it. Yes, thank you. I forgot the name on that night as well. Haldimand, Norfolk, that's correct. That is exactly it. And the story there was that actually the PC incumbent was not running for re-election. He had wanted Bobby Ann Brady to run in his place. She was someone who worked in his office. The PCs in the riding decided that no, they didn't want that. They chose someone else. And that incumbent, that former PC MPP, who again, his name is escaping me, could it have been Toby Barrett or anyway, campaign for Bobby Ann Brady and was actually able to win the riding. That's actually something, someone should do an in-depth study about how this independent candidate was able to win a riding. And these are big ridings, the Ontario provincial, you're talking about the same map as federally, and to win it as an independent candidate that no one noticed outside of that riding, right? There's not a single report I'd seen about this campaign being able to win. It was really quite surprising. All right. So we have a former Green leadership candidate in the chat as well. So hello to everybody, and hello to Sarah Gabriel Barron. This is a fun live chat. You guys are fun. All right. So we're now up to 35 polls reporting, 15%. And the gap right now between Charles Sousa, who has now cleared 1,000 votes, is about 26 points. So we're still seeing that kind of gap, that 25, 26, 24-point gap between Charles Sousa and Ron Chinzer. And the vote gap now we're starting to get to just under 500 votes, which, would still be a big win, would still be very close if it ended up like that at the end of the night. Sean Carson is now at 25. See, look, he's not just taking off. It's not like he's getting 20 votes every time there. He just picked up 2 more votes. I think Sean Carson's getting some extra votes here. I think there's an error. And some of the other independents still are without a ballot cast in their favor, probably in part because they don't live in the riding, which would have helped. See, Noah says that Bobby Ann was favored to win the entire time by people in Haldimand, Norfolk. That's what I find is so interesting. Is that it went unnoticed by the rest of us, which is a failing on the part of the provincial media. But it wasn't even like a close independent victory. She won by a decent amount. We should have known that she was a contender. It's just interesting that it went away from everybody. I'm sorry that I'm sniffling a little bit. Toby Barrett, yes, that's correct. Okay. All right. We're still all having fun at the expense of the minor candidates here. Okay, so let's reset a little bit. I'm Eric Grenier of the Writ.ca. You should head to the Writ.ca to subscribe. You have about an hour and 45 minutes to still save 12% off a subscription for the next 12 months. The Writ is a website that I have been running since I left the CBC in the summer of 2021. It's been a lot of fun. Really happy with how it's been going. No regrets, really enjoying it. And it's great that I get to do these kinds of things. I really enjoy that. So this by-election is taking place because Sven Spangeman, who was the Liberal MPP starting in 2015, re-elected in 2019 and 2021, resigned back in June to take a job with the United Nations where he had worked before. The Liberals called the by-election December 12th, and this is a riding that they should hold if they're forming government. This is a riding they won 2015, 2019, 2021. The Conservatives last won it in 2011 when they formed a majority government. That's where the stakes are. If you're forming a government, you're probably winning a seat like Mississauga Lakeshore, whether you're the Liberals or the Conservatives. So if the Liberals hold it, it means that they're still in a place where they can win an election. If the Conservatives win it, it means that the Conservatives are in a place where they can win an election. So there's bragging rights here. Pierre Poilievre says, he's running for Prime Minister. If he can't win Mississauga Lakeshore, he's not going to become Prime Minister. This was their best riding out of all the Mississaugas. So if they can't win this, if they can't win a seat in Mississauga, there's no path to a Conservative government, no realistic path without it. So that's why the stakes are pretty high in this by-election. The Liberals have a good candidate in terms of name recognition, Charles Sousa. He was the finance minister under Kathleen Wynne from 2013 to 2018 at the provincial level. He was defeated in 2018 in this riding. This is where he ran. But he's now running for the federal Liberals. And He has a lot of name recognition. Mississauga Lakeshore, he was the MPP there for over 10 years. Ron Schinzer is a police officer in the Peel Regional Police. He is running for the Conservatives. And right now, he is trailing by a pretty significant margin. This riding was decided by 6 percentage points in 2021. Right now, the gap between the Liberals and the Conservatives, just as my screen refreshes, is roughly 26 points. So that's a huge gap. The Liberals won this by 11 points back in 2019, and the Conservatives won this by about 9 points in 2011. But right now they're leading by over 20 points, and we're starting to get at a decent amount of votes counted. We're at 16% of the polls reporting. Turnout's looking like it's going to be not great. We're currently at 2%. And I know that a lot of the early polls, though, had very few ballots, so we should expect that it's going to increase as it goes up. But, if you're at 16%, you're looking at if you just extrapolate this forward, the turnout's going to be somewhere around 14%. It's going to be more than that. As I said, the smallest polls are counted the fastest. The biggest polls tend to take longer to count. It takes longer to count more things. But we're not on track for a very good turnout. Let's just say that. Good evening to Commander Brantford. So we're at 1,093 votes for Charles Sousa, 56%. 576 votes for Ron Schinzer, 29.5%. And Julia Cole of the New Democrats is in third with 106 votes, 5%. So if we compare this to 2021, the Liberals are up about 11 points, which would be a very good score for them, obviously, if they can hold that. The Conservatives are down roughly 9 points, which is, again, not very good for them. This is the kind of riding where they managed to get 39% in 2021, 37% in 2019, 41% in 2015. These are all elections they lost. So if they can't manage to get into the high 30s, that's not good. I know this is a by-election, but results don't differ that much from by-elections to general elections unless something is really specific is happening. Now, Charles Sousa is a well-known person, so he might be getting more people to turn out. But I do think that so far, this is not a very good result for the Conservatives. We'll see where things end up. Amanda asks, what's my favorite Canadian political memoir? I tend not to read memoirs. People tend to be somewhat self-serving in their memoirs. I prefer biographies, and I do read a lot of those. In terms of which ones I've read recently that I enjoyed, I read the one on Diefenbach, Rogue Tory, recently. That was very good to read. I enjoyed that one. Can't think of other ones. I just recently read a book, Journey to Power, which is about the 1968 election, and that was pretty interesting, especially since it was written in 1969. So it didn't know what was going to happen with Pierre Trudeau or who some of the characters were that they were naming. At one point it mentions Brian Mulroney, just as some guy who was volunteering on a conservative campaign. I always find that kind of interesting. Amanda recommends Time and Chance by Kim Campbell. So there you go. This is an interesting point, my Commander Brantford. Low turnout is a good sign for the Liberal government. Dissatisfied voters turn out to vote. Looks like low dissatisfaction voters so far. I think that's true. I think that it's the same thing in general elections as in by-elections. If turnout is low, that's usually good for the incumbent because it means people aren't so upset with the government that they need to go out and vote it out. So if turnout does seem to be lower than it usually is for by-elections, because by-elections usually has lower turnout, then that could suggest that a lot of the people who stayed home were not necessarily Liberal voters, but that they weren't that concerned to bother voting. I don't want to mess around, but the refresh is at, I believe, 80 or 90 seconds. So this is what's happening here. So we're now at 17.95% of the ballots of the polls reporting, 42 of 234. So that's nearly 1,200 votes for Charles Sousa, and his lead over Ron Chinzer has remained steady at 25 points. That really hasn't moved very much. We do have the Conservatives now over 30%, they're at 30.4%. The New Democrats are in third at 5.6%, which is a drop of roughly 4 points from where they were in the last election. That's kind of expected with the New Democrats in ridings where they're not really contesting. In by-elections, they tend to have a difficult time getting support, or getting their people to go out and vote at least. Sorry, I'm just looking at some stats here. As Jay Patruck makes the good point that Mississauga isn't the entire 905, but the score that the Liberals are putting up there is quite good. It's true that Mississauga Lakeshore does not represent all the 905, right? Because we're talking about 5 ridings in Mississauga, or is it 6? Anyway, there's 11 ridings in Mississauga, or there are 10. Anyway, I can't remember these specific numbers, but there's a lot of ridings in Mississauga, in Brampton. You have the ridings in Burlington, Oakville, Milton, all the ones to the north of Toronto, in Markham, in Vaughan, and in Durham, and Pickering, Ajax, all those ridings. But the thing is, there's not that much separating them in terms of how they vote. When one party wins the GTA, they tend to win a lot of the GTA. It's not that they win little pockets here or there. There are parts that are more conservative and more liberal. The portions north of Toronto tend to be a bit better for the Conservatives. That is where they can do best. The New Democrats have some abilities to do well in some parts of Brampton, for example, Oshawa, of course. But a lot of the ridings tend to swing together. So if you're able to win a seat like Mississauga Lakeshore, you're probably winning 2 or 3 or 4 more of the Mississauga ridings. You're probably swinging some of the ridings in Brampton. You're probably swinging maybe at Burlington or in Oakville. You might even be swinging in Etobicoke, some of those ridings that are a bit more conservative as well. So that's why this kind of seat is pretty important. It is just one by-election. It would have been great if we had 2 or 3 by-elections in the GTA, more representative. But this is a strong result for the Liberals, and if they can hold it and win in Mississauga Lakeshore, it is a good result for them. Let's remember, this government has been in power now for more than 7 years. There's been 3 general elections. Trudeau has been leader of the Liberal Party now for going on a decade, pretty soon. And they're still able to win these ridings, or at least do very well in these ridings. I won't call it yet. That floor hasn't fallen out for them just yet. So, if there's an election held today, you'd still expect that the Liberal floor would be 120, 130 seats. And then the rest would just be how the campaign goes. And I think that's where they still have a lot of strength, is that floor remains pretty high. It hasn't been able to fall out from under them. But the Conservatives, it's the same thing. Their floor is steady as well. And so we're in a competitive kind of environment here where neither party is able to really break through. And, that's probably better news for the incumbent, because when it comes down to it in a close election, the incumbent's probably going to end up getting those advantages. So we're now getting some more votes counted, not too many. We're at 19% of the polls reporting. So we're at 54.6% for Charles Sousa, 31.2% for Ron Chinzer of the Conservatives. So that gap now is about a little over 23 points. So that gap has gotten a little bit smaller. But we're still talking at a pretty wide gap. This was a riding that the Liberals, remember, won by 6 points. We're now at a gap that's about 4 times that. And that 6-point win that they had in 2021, 6.2 percentage points, was the tightest of their 3 wins here recently. They won by 6.5 points in 2015 and 11 points in 2019. There was a lot of talk in 2019 about how Doug Ford hurt the Conservatives. You can kind of see it in that Mississauga result there, where they lost by 11 points. But we'll see if these gaps are going to get tighter. And if we're going through the independents, Melody Anderson's starting to do a little bit better. This is the little running thing where, as the top of the ballot, maybe she'll do better than other ones. But among those independents, we still got Sean Carson with 26. We're wondering where those 20 votes came from all of a sudden. And after that, we have nobody in double digits. We have Patrick Strakowski with 9, and Charles Curry with 8, and no one with 7. So there you go. But they're starting to. You combine them all, they're doing not too bad. Someone could run the numbers for me probably, but they're probably combining for 3% of the vote. And you want me to make a call on Carson? I can't imagine why in this one poll he would get 20 votes. Because we just saw Charles Sousa get 20 votes in one of these polls. So it looks like a transcription error to me. Or a counting error. The Kool-Aid Man 528 Abacus released a poll today with CPC up 39.35 in Ontario. It doesn't feel like that matches up with this result at all. No, it doesn't. Doesn't necessarily mean that the poll is wrong, but you also have to think about where the numbers are. If the Conservatives are running up the numbers in rural areas more than they did before, that's not going to gain them more seats. This is one of the things that's interesting, just to change the topic a little bit, in Alberta. So the general consensus is that the UCP, the United Conservatives, can win in Alberta even if they're behind the NDP by a few points provincially. And I don't know if that's true anymore, because if you're looking at the latest numbers out of Alberta, Danielle Smith seems to have helped boost the UCP a little bit in conservative rural areas, but the NDP is now very competitive in Calgary. And in some of these polls, even if they're behind the UCP by a point or two, if they're winning in Calgary and they're winning in Edmonton, they can probably win the most seats. So the same thing can be true here in Ontario with this vote. If the Conservatives are increasing their share of the vote in Northern Ontario, let's say, where the PCs did pretty well, in Southwest, in Central Ontario, in parts of Eastern Ontario, and instead of winning by 40 or 50 points, they're winning by 60 or 70 points, but they're not getting more support in Mississauga, in the GTA, then you can imagine where the Conservatives could be moving ahead in the vote provincially, but not doing better in seats like this. So that is a possibility. But again, the Abacus poll in Ontario, I don't know what the sample was, assuming it was 1,500 or 2,000. The sample in Ontario is probably somewhere around 600 or 700. The margin of error there is still going to be pretty high, right? It's still going to be like 4 points or whatever. And then when you take out the undecideds, it increases maybe to 5 or 6 or 7 points. So we do need to take that into account, and that's why generally averaging the polls has always been something that I've done in the past, and I think that can be better when you do that, especially with provincial results. So if anybody is on the Twitter machine, assuming it still operates, what's really funny? So my followers on Twitter got up to about 50.4 thousand or something like that. And over the last 2 months, it went down to 49.6. So I lost about 800 followers on Twitter all of a sudden. And I don't think I became suddenly much more offensive. I think that some people seem to be leaving the platform. But anyway, I've just noticed that on my own Twitter profile. I wonder if others have noticed it for themselves. But anyway, if any of you do see that the networks call this, you can be the good Samaritan who shares the news here. Charles Sousa has delivered a victory speech. Well, that would be embarrassing if he loses it. You know, I do feel pretty comfortable at this stage to say he is probably going to win. He's up 25 points. That 25-point gap has held pretty firm. We're now at 21% of the ballots counted. It would be not impossible. Advanced polls, for example, maybe they're counted last, whatever. But he now has to overcome a pretty big gap. Not to say he can't, because look, we're still talking about 662 votes. Which isn't a lot of votes. But there's not a lot of voters. There's not a lot of voters here right now. So, you know, we've got turnouts up to 3%. We're expecting, or at least was reported, that there are 9,100 advanced voters. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens here. Someone's saying that, Cameron is saying that he thinks Chinzo will end up 35-36%. You know, we'll see if he does start to do better as some more of these polls get counted. But he's been stuck around that 30% now for a little while. So, you know, I'll be honest, it would surprise me if the Conservatives ended up with 30% of the vote. You know, you look at the polling and this kind of stuff, you wouldn't expect them to be losing. Now they're up to 31, so maybe they're doing a little bit better. We're now at 55 of 234 votes, polls reporting. We're still on track for turnout of somewhere around 12, 13, 14%, which would not be very good, but we'll see where it ends up. I had a private little bet with Philippe Fournier, who was talking about turnout. I optimistically took the over, but I can tell you that this is not looking like an overnight for turnout. But you know, I always complain when people estimate turnout too early. So we'll see where it ends up. But you know, we're at nearly 1 in 4 votes counted, and our turnout currently is only at 3%. So I think most of the people who voted are on this live stream right now. Matthew Tong, will the margin drop into single digits? We'll see, because right now we're only at a gap of 24 points, which is on the lower side of what we've seen over the evening so far. But you know, each of these polls we're going to have to start to see. Like, let's just think about it this way, right? Okay, so. Here, let's do some calculator math. The gap right now is 23.8 points. And we have 179 polls left to report. So we need to see the gap close by about 0.1 each and every time we see one of these polls close. Does that make sense? Yeah, roughly makes sense, I think. But anyway, so any poll that is not closing the gap is making it tougher for Ron Schinzer. So we'll see right now. So we're at 54.7. So the gap is right now 23.8 points. We'll see if the next sets of polls increases that or not. Yeah, that's a good point. If there are 9,100 advance ballots cast, then that means we will end up at least 10%. So, yeah, that's the danger in extrapolating the numbers. If we expect that advance polling is going to be better or worse than, if we expect it to be worse than day of polling, then we should be guaranteed to be over 20%, which means we still got tons of votes to count. Because even if we're at 20% turnout, let's say that's where we end up. That means we need about 17, almost 18,000 votes. So we're still 15,000 votes shy of a final count. So we still got a long ways to go. So we are at a gap right now of 24 points, which means that the last polls that opened up did not, or that were reported, did not widen the gap or shrink in the gap. They widened it by 0.2 percentage point. There you go. Noah Chaffee spells that out. Well, I'm seeing some discussion in the live chat about whether the longest ballot is an initiative of the Rhino Party. I was under the impression that it was, or at least they were kind of helping organize it. But I'm happy to be disabused of this notion if that is not the case. Cameron Bonesso is wondering if the early vote is going to boost the Conservatives. We'll see once it's counted. The early vote usually, if I'm not mistaken, gets counted last because the polls tend to be bigger. So there's more votes in them, so they take longer to count. So we might see big chunks of that happen at the end. And if the Conservatives did better in the advance polls, then we'd expect that near the end they would start to do a lot better. According to reports from Twitter, the CBC has called it. I'm not gonna. I can't disagree with calling it. I'm not going to say that it's in the bag. No, I'm seeing some disputes in the live chat. Apparently, you can't believe the live chat. Oh, Sharon tweeted it out. Well. Sharon, of course, is a friend who worked on the decision desk at CBC, and she knows her elections. And if she's calling it out, then then that's probably it. But hold the phone. The gap is now 23.2 points. Goodness, it has really shrunken. I think that, look, we're going to go, if it gets back to, all right, Sharon Musgrave calls it, that's pretty official. She knows what she's doing. But Sharon, I'm not going to second guess you at all, because I do think the Liberals probably end up winning this. But I just want to see where this ends up. So the gap is now 23.2 points, so it has actually shrunk. If we see the gap go back up to 25 points, I think that's when I'm going to call it. Oh, now she deleted it. Oh my. Oh my, this is very dramatic. Very dramatic, people. I am just repeating what the live chat says. I do not know what's happening. Philip has called it. Oh, Philip. Doesn't have the staying power. Doesn't want to stick around for the long haul. All right. So we're having disputed claims of what's happening with the Twitter machine and the call from the CBC. But it looks like the CBC has called it. Now, is the writ going to call it? I don't know. Let's wait and see what's happening. I do want to see if this gap is going to get bigger or not. I have now a second source confirming on my phone that the CBC has called the Mississauga Lakeshore by-election for Charles Sousa of the Liberals, who, according to the CBC decision desk, is the next MP for Mississauga Lakeshore. Oh, this is an interesting point from Eliza Palace. That the advance vote and the election day vote was won by similar margins. You got 6 points for the election day and 5 points for the advance poll, so probably not going to change it. Oh, I have a calming voice? That's nice. Thank you. I'll do some of that, what is it? The whatever that weird thing is on YouTube. Helps people go to sleep. All right. I am going to call it soon, and in calling it, I mean in terms of the stream, but you can stick around for a little bit longer. We'll see if this gap's going to close. Maybe we could stick around as long as the gap is closing. So we're at 23.2 before the last update. We're now at 22.6. Oh my goodness, we have a race, people. All right, no, we don't have a race, but the gap is tightening. So let's see let's stick around until we see that the gap isn't tightening anymore. So we're now down to 22.6 points between the Liberals and the Conservatives, which would still be a very bad result for the Conservatives and a very good result for the Liberals. Again, I've said this throughout the night, but Mississauga Lakeshore is the kind of riding that the Conservatives need to win to form a government. If the Conservatives are going to win, yes, ASMR, that's it. No, I don't want to do that. That's weird. If the Conservatives win the next election, they need to at least win enough seats that it becomes untenable for another party to try to retain, for the Liberals to retain government, for example. Will the Leafs win the Stanley Cup? No, of course not. Because if, let's say, there's a 5-seat gap between the Conservatives and the Liberals, the Conservatives win more, you can see the Liberals stay in power with the support of other parties. If instead you get the Conservatives up to 150, 160, and the Liberals are down to 110, 120, then it would, while it would be completely legitimate, politically it might be difficult for the Liberals to retain office if the gap is not big enough between, if the gap is too big between the Conservatives and the Liberals, and the Conservatives are too close to the majority mark. But to get to 150, 160 seats for Pierre Poilievre, he needs Mississauga Lakeshore. That's one of those seats. He could probably win 130, 140 seats without it and win a plurality, but that might not be good enough to form a government. So that's why this is a really important seat. And yes, it's a by-election. Yes, the turnout is low. But right now we're looking at a gap of 22.6 percentage points. It was 6 points last time. If the gap tightens, then the storyline gets a little bit less bad for the Conservatives. But, Pierre Poilievre needs to win these kinds of ridings to form a government. So right now this is looking like a bad night for the Conservatives and a good night for the Liberals, who, I remind you, have been in power for 7+ years and, are still able to win these kind of battleground swing ridings. Of the independents, remember we have 35 non-affiliated candidates or 34 non-affiliated candidates. Sean Carson, perhaps still benefiting from that weird poll box that had him jump 20 votes for some reason, has 27 votes. He's now up to 28. Oh wait. Okay, so we were at 22.6 before. We're now at 21.2. That's very exciting. Very exciting. Right now the gap continues to drop. We're now at 21.2 points. Maybe we'll get to under 20 points. That'll look a little bit less bad. The Greens have increased their share of the vote by 1 percentage points. Sky's the limit for them. So yeah, let's do a little reset there. 53.4% for the Liberals. That represents a gain of roughly 9 points since the last election. 32.2% for the Conservatives is a drop of 6 points from the last election. The NDP is at 6%. That's a drop of 4 points. The Greens are at 3%. That's a gain of 1. The People's Party is at 1%. That's a loss of 3. So the losers in terms of vote share tonight are, so far, the New Democrats, People's Party, and the Conservatives. And the winners are the Liberals and the Greens. So Sousa has projected his own victory. It's not an endorsement. Come on. All right. So the longest ballot, we should try for the longest stream. We should see. Do you know that I did the federal election? I was on for 7 hours, 7 or 8 hours. You can still watch it. I don't know how I didn't go to the bathroom that entire time. Anyway. So the gap is at 21.2. We're waiting to see. We're going to stay as long as the gap tightens. If the gap widens again, I think that's going to be it. So I do think that these are good results for the Liberals. You do wonder if the Liberals, how much of the impact is Charles Sousa. We're at 30% of the vote counted. He is a well-known candidate. He was a finance minister in Kathleen Wynne's government for 5 years. I think that he is probably making it easier for the Liberals to win a by-election. Because it's hard to get jazzed up to go vote in a by-election unless you're one of us. But this is someone who's well-known, someone who's recognized name. You go down the road, you see his name on a ballot. Oh, yeah, I remember that guy. Might be a lot easier to get someone to go to cast a ballot. But I don't know if it's fair to say that, this 10-point boost, 9 point, 8 points, whatever it ends up being, is up to Charles Sousa. Okay, we were at 21.2 before. Let's run the math. It's too late for me to do it in my head. We're at 21.1. That is lower than what I just said, right? I think it is. So we're still lower. The Conservatives gave up once Sousa was on the ballot. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think that probably took the wind out of their sails a little bit. It certainly didn't help, right? In a by-election, the challenge is turnout. And if you don't have someone who's well-known, it can be tough to get your people to go out, right? We saw that with the Greens in the by-election that took place in Toronto Centre. Annemie Paul was able to get, what was that she ended up with, 32%, something like that. And in the next election, a general election, where she had national profile, she was in 2 debates, she ended up getting less, I think it was 6 or 7%, very bad. But it was because it was a by-election and a well-known person, able to get a lot of people to come out and vote. All right, so we were at 21.1. And I think people it just widened. 21.1. We're now at 21.2. Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. And we'll stick around for a little bit more. Just a bit. All right, so let's see. 53.5% for the Liberals, 32.3% for the Conservatives, 5.9% for the New Democrats, 3.4% for the Greens. I know there's a big Green contingent tonight. It's gone up a little bit. 1.3% for the People's Party. And among the independents, our leader remains Sean Carson with 0.7%. We had 2 people with 13%. Charles Curry is giving a run to Patrick Strakowski, who's also at 13%. There are still a couple of people who have 0. Not very many. You got Isaac Dupont, Samuel Jubainville, Alain Lamontagne, Pascal Saint-Amand, and Darcy Justin Vanderwater. Again, a lot of these are Francophone names. Come on, people of Mississauga Lakeshore. Okay. So, we're going to wait. We got 7 seconds before my screen. And we'll see if these votes change at all. They have not. All right, so we'll stick around for a bit. So, it's not that I want to go to bed. I actually want to write a results analysis. So I have to kind of wait till more of this votes are counted. So I wouldn't go to bed even if I turn off the stream. I could just get up early tomorrow, but I don't want to do that. Anyway. This is the life I chose. Okay, so the big winners tonight, obviously the Liberals. Holding a riding that they need to hold, getting a star candidate elected, someone who might end up, well, someone wants me to go to bed. You don't need to watch. Someone who could end up in cabinet, let's say the Liberals decide to do a shuffle in January, because someone decides they're retiring, that kind of thing. You could see Charles Sousa in the cabinet. So this is a good result for them. And, you know, they've been facing a lot of pressure from the Conservatives with Pierre Poilievre's very impressive leadership victory. And, you know, it's been a tough year for them, I guess you could say. But to win this riding in a pretty convincing fashion in a place that is a swing area that Pierre Poilievre needs to win in the next election, there's lots of bragging rights from this win tonight. And the fact that they get a good candidate elected as an MP, it's not just a bragging rights, it's an actual achievement that will help them next time. Charles Sousa on the ballot will help. You know, Philippe is making fun of me for the low turnout. Charles Sousa on the ballot next time will help the Liberals in Mississauga. Will help the Mississauga Lakeshore. Will make it harder for the Conservatives to win this riding next time. For the Conservatives, I do think that this is a problematic result for them. Well, even now, Radcan is calling it. I think Radcan uses the same decision desk as CBC, at least for outside of Quebec. But anyway. Now, this for the Conservatives, we'll see where they end up. If they end up with the same vote share or similar to it as last time, maybe it's not so bad. But if they do end up dropping, I mean, earlier on in the night, people were asking what kind of margin would be bad. And I said anything between 5 and 3 points. If the Conservatives still lose it by 5 to 3 points, that would be bad. But it looks like there's a very good chance that they will make it less than, they will lose by more than they did last time, which is very bad. Obviously, you want to have the bigger number. Bigger numbers are better than smaller numbers. Number one rule of politics. All right, we do have an update. So we're at 21.2. We're now 20.7. So it is getting smaller. All right. Bonsoir, Philippe. He's going to go make a dodo. All right, so we are at 20.7 points. Now, the Conservatives are at 32.5% of the vote, which means they're down 5 points right now. So it's not as bad. But you see that the Liberals are up right now a little bit over 8 percentage points. So they're not getting that all from the Conservatives. Now, a lot of it is just turnout. There are people turning up more than other people, whatever. But it does seem like some of the NDP vote, or at least the NDP's vote share, because it's down, the Liberals are going up. So the Conservatives are also losing some votes, but the Liberals are not just taking it from the Conservatives tonight so far. Also taking some from the NDP. So we're now I'm 10 seconds away from the next refresh. we are getting close to 11 o'clock. I do think I'm going to have to call it pretty soon. So we're at 20.7. And it didn't change. All right. There's a question here if I think polls are overestimating the Conservatives. No, I don't think so. I think some of them are. The IVR polls tend to do better for the Conservatives in general. But if you look at the results in the last couple elections, the polls underestimated the Conservatives. So I would still default to expecting the average to be underestimating the Conservatives. Individual polls, some of them I think are overestimating them. I think we saw some of that in the last election. I can't recall. But as a general rule, I would expect the polls to underestimate Conservatives versus results. Not necessarily versus like actual support, but in terms of turnout. Because the Conservatives do better among older people, more older people vote, they tend to beat their polls. So I think that's what happens there. And how much of the margin do you think is due to low turnout? Well, I mean, that's part of it. Lower turnout means it's more important if you can get your people out to vote. So we'll see where the turnout ends up, but it doesn't look like it's going to be very good. All right. We were at 20.7 before. We're now 20.4. So it is continuing to decrease. I do wonder if it does seem to me we're going to end up under 20 points between the two parties. But to get to 10 points, let's say, that's going to be tough. I've seen some discussion about the result for the NDP. Right now they're at 6.1%, so they've dropped 3.7%. Or percentage points. That's not a great result for them. But as I've said before, the NDP has a lot of trouble getting its vote out in ridings where they're not really in contention in by-elections. They can drop a huge amount and sometimes score. I remember there was a by-election, I can't remember when it was. It might have been quite a while ago in Alberta, perhaps. Anyway. And the NDP did so poorly it finished behind the Christian Heritage Party. Now, they didn't finish behind the Christian Heritage Party in that riding in the next general election, but in a by-election it can be really tough for the NDP. So that's why when they do badly in one of these ridings, I don't read too much into it. The fact that the Greens are not doing worse than last time is a bit surprising to me. I think it's tough for them as well as the NDP, so... I know there's lots of Green supporters on the live chat for some reason. I mean, obviously 3.5% isn't a good result, but hey, if you're doing better than last time, that's good. All right, we are now down from 20.4 to 20.3. All right, so we're going to stick around. This is my pledge. Once we get to an increase in the margin, I think that's going to be it. All right, I think that's going to be it. Sam Griffin asks if I think this proves Poilievre's inabilities to gain support in key Toronto ridings. I don't think it proves that. This is one sample. It's not enough to say it's a widespread thing. Yes, the Medicine Hat. That's where the Christian Heritage Party beat the NDP. Thank you. Excuse me. But I think it does show that the Conservatives aren't necessarily doing better than Andrew Scheer and Aaron O'Toole did in the GTA. That Poilievre won the Conservative leadership very impressively. He has a message that should appeal to people in the suburbs about housing, affordability, inflation, and all this kind of stuff. And this is not proving that he's making inroads. Now, it doesn't mean that means he's failing. It's one by-election. But he can't use these results to say, I can win in the suburbs. You know, he often says that he represents a suburban riding. I think he might have even called it an urban riding. Now he's from the riding Carleton, which is not too far from here in Ottawa, and it is a mixed riding. It includes some suburban areas, just like those newly sprung up residential developments, but it also includes lots of rural areas to the south in Ottawa, small towns. So it is a bit of a mixed riding. It's almost a rural urban riding rather than a suburban riding. So I think that from these results, this isn't a proof point that he's able to appeal to these ridings. But it doesn't mean that he can't. But it means that whatever he's been doing over the last little while hasn't been reaching out to the voters that he needs in the next election. Let's take a look again at the independents. Melody Anderson really didn't do as well as I thought that she was going to do. She was at the top of the ballot. Now, she did do better than Miriam Beaulieu, Lynn Bélanger, Mylène Bonneau. Oh boy, we're now to 20 points even. So the margin continues to shrink. I'm sure some of the people who call it are starting to sweat a little bit, but 20 points is a lot to overcome. We're still at 1,000 votes. 1,000 votes to overcome in maybe 15,000 that are gonna be left to count. Turnout is still looking pretty abysmal, I gotta say. Again, I know it's early, but we're still on track for somewhere in the high teens. So I think we'll probably end up in the low 20s based on the last polls having more ballots in them than others. Seeing some calls that Sean Carlson will win the independent race, and if his votes aren't called back, it could be. There's a question from Alexander Hardig: is there anywhere in the riding that is normally a large conservative stronghold? So let's take a look again at this map. So now I'm looking at the one in the top corner, which is just above me here. So if we look at the poll by poll, I know this is probably too small for you to see, unless you're full screen or something. But you can see that the riding polls in the middle of the riding were conservative. Now, were they strongholds? If I'm looking at the polls, 47% here, 40% there, 42% there, 42, 50. These are a bit 50. You're not seeing a huge amount of polls where the Conservatives really ran away with it. This one they had 61%. That's one of their better ones there. But a lot of these polls that were won by the Conservatives were still pretty close. 53% there. So we had one where I know you guys are. I think we had one where the Greens were second. But anyway, you can see that there's not a huge amount of riding districts that are polling boxes that were really conservative in the last time. So it's unlikely that one of those regions of the riding that is really conservative is going to swing once it starts reporting. So it doesn't seem likely that it can be overcome just based on the geography of it. But to keep the margins closer, right now we're at a 20-point gap. If a lot of the polls that have yet to report were more like 5-point gaps, 10-point gaps, then you're going to see that the margin's going to keep shrinking. So we're waiting for the refresh. I can already see in your, you want me to do it now. Your chat's behind when I'm talking, you guys, I'm like 30 seconds behind where you guys were. All right, so we were at 20 points before. We're now at 32.7. We're now at 20.4. I think that's going to be it, guys. I think that's going to be it. Ladies and gentlemen, this stream went on for a lot longer than I expected, and we're only at 38% of the ballots cast. All right, so I think that's going to be it. And thanks for all of you for watching and going on the live chat. It was a lot of fun. The fact that you guys are having fun actually made me want to stick around longer than I probably would have. So let's recap. Liberals have self-proclaimed themselves the winner. The CBC and other areas have called this riding. It looks like they're going to win it. They're up by about 20 points. They only won this riding by 6 points last time, so we'll see if that margin is going to shrink. But it looks like a big night for the Liberals, a good night for them. Conservatives are going to have to be making some excuses. We'll see where this ends up. Check the writ.ca tomorrow morning. I'm going to have an analysis of the results. But I can already tell that probably, I'm going to say this is a good night for the Liberals, bad one for the Conservatives. So head to the writ.ca. You still have 50 minutes to subscribe and save 12% on a subscription for the next 12 months. Lots happening in the next 12 months. Alberta election, Manitoba election, PEI election. Yes, a PEI election, and lots more. So subscribe to the Writ, and we'll do one of these live streams again in the future, I'm sure. So thanks for watching. Have a good night, and I'll see you soon.